right, good evening to everyone. Welcome to the Falls Church City Council, May 23rd, 2022 meeting. I'd like to call our meeting to order and ask that you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
All right, Madam Clerk, will you call roll, please?
Yes. I was so ready for the VML winners that I was ready to announce them before I did roll. So let's do that first. Ms. Conley? Here. Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Hardy? Here. Ms. Leon?
Here.
Ms. Shancisco?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
And Mayor Charter?
Here.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Let's move on to adoption of the meeting agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt the meeting agenda.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, the ayes have it. So now we're on to the proclamations and special presentations. We've got a very busy agenda tonight with those, and our first is a very special If I Were Mayor contest, and we're very fortunate to have the president of the Virginia Municipal League with us tonight, and here he comes, right on cue. So welcome, John. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Mayor Trotter, a member of council. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's fun, and I'll even turn my microphone on for you. So how about that? It's like you can teach someone how to do this here. Again, my name is John Staley. Thank you for having us here this evening. I have the privilege of being a council member in one of your close cities, the city of Fairfax, and also the president of the Virginia Municipal League. A quick note for those in the audience about the league. We're a really neat group. We get to come together from across the Commonwealth, if you're a city, town, or county, and really have conversations about what's going on in governing, and it's why I thoroughly enjoy being a part of it. I get to learn something new every time I come here. This is my first time in your new city hall, so I appreciate the opportunity to be here. This is the one very special evening I get to have, which is to announce the winners of the essay contest for the 7th grade. As you may know, across the Commonwealth, we do If I Were Mayor essay contests, and we have multiple regions, and tonight we're going to announce 2 winners. We're going to announce the Region 5 winner as well as the President's winner. And in full disclosure, I read them all without knowing where they were from, so I had no idea where this person was from when I picked the President's winner. So the essay contest and the prompt this year was all about identifying a problem in your community, and this was my favorite part of the essay contest, and talk to somebody about it. It's good to identify problems. It's even better to engage with stakeholders and find out what the answers might be in there. And this year, out of hundreds of submissions, we have 2 winners. I'm going to announce them both, and I'm going to ask them both to join me up here for some photos. So the Region 5 winner is Rose Weatherly of Mary Ellen Henderson Middle School, and her teacher is Mr. Buck. So congratulations, Rose, for the Region 5 winner. In addition, we also had a winner. Apparently there's something in the water at Mary Ellen Henderson Middle School, because it is Charlotte Liu, who is in Miss Amos's class, and she won the President's Award. So congratulations, Charlotte. And if I could share with you both, Charlotte's essay struck me in particular because of her use of engaging folks about composting. And as you may know, we share ride your contract here to do composting both here in Falls Church and in the city of Fairfax. So it was an awesome essay and a great chance to learn about her. So thank you both, and I think we're going to do a photo up here if we can, Mayor. With that, I turn it back to you.
All right, well, thank you so much. Let's bring our contest winners down. Let's get a great photo. Congratulations to you both. And we are so proud of the great work you guys are doing, the future that you have before you. So let's come on down and take a photo. And if you'd like, maybe you can even have a seat here in the spot just for a minute and see how that feels. Pins for you. All right, thank you, John, appreciate it. Let's move on now to some more impressive young folks with the City Council youth representatives, and I think our city clerk is going to do the honors in terms of naming all those children, so.
And we'll have representatives from the Citizens for a Better City as well, but I will read the names of the youth representatives for this year. And if you want to come up, when I read your name, we can start lining up in front of here because we'll do the oath up there. And so then you can say a few words. That would be awesome. So council was asked to recognize the following students as student representatives to city boards and commissions and the electoral board. John Toole, Architectural Advisory Board. Jacqueline Conley, Arts and Humanities Council. Matthew Downs, Economic Development Authority. Preston Liu, Electoral Board. Ivy Anderson, Environmental Services Council. Sustainability Council. Hannah Hall, Environmental Sustainability Council. Gia Khan, we'll say ESC, Environmental Sustainability Council. Alexis Nimi, ESC. Sean Lester, Historical Commission. Turan Ahmad, Housing Commission. Pennington Jones, Housing Commission. Jack Ackerman, Human Services Advisory Council. Liz Rotherman, Human Services Advisory Council. Carter Williams, Human Services Advisory Council. Caroline Carmody, Recreation and Parks Advisory Board. Anand Colby, Recreation and Parks Advisory Board. Catherine Hall, Urban Forestry Commission. Council was also asked to recognize the following students as student representatives to civic organizations. Matthew Bloss-Baum, Creative Cauldron. Jay Humphreys, Falls Church Chamber of Commerce. Dominic Mamoli, Falls Church Chamber of Commerce. Samantha Groom, Falls Church Democratic Party. Jack Loper, Falls Church Democratic Party. Sean Lewin, Falls Church Education Foundation. Abigail Lindley, Falls Church Education Foundation. Annalise Barron, Falls Church Lions Club. Jenna Hall, Falls Church Women's History Group. Ruby Jones, League of Women Voters. Edith Jagerskog, Tinner Hill Social Justice Committee, and Elisa Nguyen, Tinner Hill Social Justice Committee.
All right, let's have a big round of applause for these very impressive young children.
Okay, we're going to do the oath first, okay. Wide angle.
Step in a few steps on either side.
Turn a shoulder or two.
Get friendly.
Fine. Thank you.
All right. As we traditionally do, we were doing an oath of office for the group. So if everybody wants to raise your right hand and just say, I do or I don't. Do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and that you will faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all the duties incumbent upon you as a youth representative to a city board or commission or a community group according to the best of your ability, so help you God? Thank you. So you all
And folks, yes, I do. Of course, Lindy always has something to say. But this is so exciting. What wonderful, wonderful young people. On behalf of the Citizens for Better City, this is our newest class group of youth representatives to boards and commissions, and also just for the second year in a row to civic groups, so we're very proud of them. We do have 29 that we are recognizing tonight. However, you probably noticed there were some that were missing. There happens to be a couple lacrosse regional games going on tonight, and team is a little bit more important than this, so that's something we always have to be aware of. But these young people did their applications, and they do it all on their own, and then they go for an interview, and I happen to have had the pleasure of interviewing each and every one of them. And it was just, I just sit there and say, wow, and superstars, and just it's amazing. And they've all been through training with Gina Katucci and also Josh Singer up at the high school is helping us out this year. And we're just so proud of them. We've got a total of 49 now. With this new group, we'll have a total of 49 out in the community and boards and commissions and learning all about city government and civic work and everything, and we're so proud of them. But a big thank you to all of our council, and a big thank you to our city clerk, who's always worked so nicely with us. But we're very, very proud of this crew. Yay!
Thank you all, and congratulations. Where are you all going? You're supposed to stick around for civic engagement. All right, well, thank you all for your involvement in our community. We're very proud of you, of every one of you, so thank you. All right, let's move on. Our next item on the agenda is a proclamation declaring June 4th through the 12th as Chesapeake Bay Awareness Week. And Ms. Leon is going to do the honors.
Yes, thank you. Let me put this closer. Whereas the Chesapeake Bay is the largest and most productive estuary in the United States, with its watershed spanning 6 states and the District of Columbia. And whereas the Chesapeake Bay watershed, covering 64,000 square miles, is an extraordinary and vital natural resource with some of the nation's most productive farm and forest lands. And whereas the Chesapeake Bay is fed by 50 major tributaries, including the Susquehanna, Potomac, Rappahannock, York, and James rivers, and stretches 200 miles from Havre de Grace, Maryland, to Norfolk, Virginia. And whereas the Chesapeake Bay watershed is home to more than 18 million people, many of whom rely upon the watershed's natural resources for their livelihood and recreational activities. And whereas an important source of food for Virginia and the east coast of the United States, the Chesapeake Bay produces more than 400 million pounds of seafood harvest each year. And whereas the more than 76,000 farms in the Chesapeake Bay watershed contribute more than $6.8 billion in value, added contributions to the economy in the region and provide food to millions of Americans. And whereas the Chesapeake Bay's tributaries in Virginia are an important source of drinking water, which is essential for public health and economic growth and a vital resource for future generations. And whereas the rich history, pivotal economic importance, and astounding beauty of the Chesapeake Bay watershed never cease to amaze residents and visitors alike. And whereas the City of Falls Church is divided into 2 local watersheds, Trips Run and 4 Mile Run, both of which are important to the character and quality of life of the community and ultimately the health of the Chesapeake Bay. And whereas the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments has recognized the importance of Chesapeake Bay Awareness Week and has encouraged its members to do the same.
Now therefore, I, David Tarter, Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do hereby proclaim June 4th through the 12th, 2022 as Chesapeake Bay Awareness Week in the City of Falls Church and urge all to recognize the importance of this observance and to participate in events, activities, and educational programs designed to increase awareness of the importance of the Chesapeake Bay watershed in our community. Is there anyone in the audience who's going to receive this proclamation, or is this for all of us? So, all right, I've got the proclamation here, and let's make sure we take care of that most important waterway. Let's go on to our next proclamation, which is a proclamation declaring June 2020 as Pride Month, the City of Falls Church, and Ms. Conley is going to do the honors.
Whereas one of the catalysts for the LGBTQ plus movement for civil rights was the June 1969 Stonewall riots, and whereas June is celebrated as Pride Month nationwide, and whereas the City of Falls Church is proud of the meaningful, long-lasting impacts that LGBTQ plus people have made and the contributions they have brought to the city's rich and diverse culture. And whereas the City of Falls Church joins the LGBTQ plus community in a celebration of diversity and unity. And whereas the City of Falls Church remains committed to treating all people with fairness and respect and to creating a community where everyone can live without fear of prejudice, discrimination, violence, or hatred based on gender identity or sexual orientation. Whereas the City Council of the City of Falls Church recognizes that the inherent dignity and equal and inalienable rights of all people is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace. And whereas the commemoration of these events underscores our determination to support, preserve, and advance the civil rights guaranteed for all.
Now therefore, I, David Tarter, Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do hereby proclaim the month of June 2022 as Pride Month in the City of Falls Church and urge all residents to respect and honor our diverse community and celebrate and build a culture of inclusiveness and acceptance. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to receive this proclamation? Come on down. Come on, Mr. Benton. All right, Madam Clerk, are there any oaths of office to administer today?
I don't believe so, unless, is there anybody in the audience here for a board oath?
Okay.
No, I don't think so.
Let's move on then to receipt of public comment. Would you like to summarize the written comments for us?
Yes, I sure will. Received some correspondence about transitional zones. Mary Chavez wrote that the proposal for changes to the T-zones isn't ready for first reading and does not merit council support. Leslie Rye of Lawton Street asked that the process for reviewing the T-zones be slowed down so the public can understand the goals of the project. Patrick David of 608 Park Avenue and Douglas Stevens of 612 Park Avenue support changes to the T-zones along Park Avenue to allow multifamily townhouse projects. William Thompson of West Broad Street asked that the proposed changes to the T-zones be rejected on first reading and suggested, if considered, the proposal should be forwarded to the Planning Commission for a public process first. VPUS asked for a more deliberative process in considering any changes to T-zones. And then we received a few more comments on the issue by email after these were put together. Let's see. I know I have another one. Yes. Elizabeth and James Day wrote in support of the code changes to the T-zone properties to allow for construction of multifamily and townhouse projects. And then Keith Thurston wrote with comments on the project as well and asked for further deliberation about changes to the zone. From our boards and commissions, the CACT forwarded a memo regarding their recommendation for using neighborhood traffic calming funds to improve pedestrian safety near Lincoln Park. The Economic Development Authority provided comments on the West Falls Church Senior Building Special Exception Site Plan and unanimously supported the application. The Advisory Board of Recreation and Parks forwarded a draft park master plan for the Fellows property. In other comments, Sean Dakid provided information about intersection solutions at the Park Avenue and North Maple Avenue intersection. 3 students from the Oak Street Elementary provided comments on gun control. Jeff Heil of Grove Avenue asked that city utility poles be cleaned up. Joyce Migdal of West Falls Way wrote with concern about pedestrian safety measures during utility pole work at 504 Northwest Street. Lynn W. Roche urged council to reduce the size and scale of the West Falls development to be more appropriate and consistent with Falls Church City's environment, aesthetics, and values.
All right. So let's move on to the receipt of public comment. If there's anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on a matter tonight, you can either A, speak now, or B, speak when the matter of which you want to speak is called. So either now or when the matter is called. We would ask that you would state your name for the record and address for the record and keep your comments to 3 minutes. So the clerk is now going to read speakers. You're again welcome to speak now or when the matter is called. Madam Clerk?
Yes, I believe on the Teams meeting, we have Tori McKinney who signed up to speak.
Okay. Ms. McKinney? The floor is
Hi,
yours.
can you all hear me?
We can.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you, City Council, for having me tonight. Thank you, Cindy Mester and Wyatt Shield, for having me tonight. And thank you to the City of Falls Church for supporting and presenting the Tinner Hill Music Festival along with the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation. I'm Tori McKinney, and I reside at 206 West Greenway Boulevard. And I'm the executive producer of the Tinner Hill Music Festival. It takes place this year on June 11. Mark your calendars, get your phones out, make sure it's on your calendar. It's from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. and it's at Cherry Hill Park. I especially want to thank Park and Rec, Scarlett and Danny, who are just so incredibly supportive and are wonderful partners to assist in putting on the festival. So I'm probably going to just talk about what the festival represents and then a little bit about the details. So the Tinner Hill Music Festival is the premier charity event for the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation, which is an important nonprofit here in the city. And its monument and walking trail near the Target, which is also a landmark, is a wonderful place to walk and learn more about the Black history here in the city. The mission of the foundation is preserving, presenting, and celebrating the African American legacy. Super timely work is underway between the festival raising funds for the foundation's programming and the social equity committee work that they put on. So everyone can go to tinnerhill.org and you can get more information about the foundation, about the festival, and there's sign up there for volunteers donating and link for volunteering. We are in great need of volunteers. So all you students who got up there tonight, we'd love to have you. We'd welcome you with open arms to volunteer and help produce the festival. You get a free t-shirt, you get a meal, you get admission to the festival all day. So pretty exciting. And what else do I want to talk? Tickets right now are, oh, is that me echoing? Tickets for the festival right now, advanced tickets are $30. And at the gate, they go up to $40. So it really behooves you to get online at tinnerhill.org and make your purchase. I want to talk to city council staff and park and rec staff, all city employees. We have a BOGO code, buy one, get one free. So you buy your $30 ticket, you get a ticket free, $15 for admission. I can't think of a better deal anywhere for an all-day list of great music, great villages, great vendors. We have several restaurants in town that are participating in the Food Village, Liberty Barbecue, Claire and Dawn's, Mike's Deli, to name a few.
Hi, Tori. I know you probably can't hear our timer, but your 3 minutes is thank you.
Go out to Cherry Hill Park, June 11. Get your tickets in advance on tinnerhill.org. And thank you again for having me.
All right, well, thank you. I know almost all or all of us will be out there, so thanks for all the great work you do. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
All right, Madam Clerk, next up.
Yes, we have Frederick Breezy, who signed up in advance to come. Oh. Well, we'll skip that one. How about that? We'll come back to that. Hannah Jordan is next, followed by Pat Kennedy. Veronica, can you make sure that's on?
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Hannah Jordan. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Hannah Jordan. I'll keep this really quick. I live at 414 Lincoln Avenue since 1996, and I'm speaking as a private citizen, not as a member of any commission or Welcoming Falls Church or anything that I'm involved in. I'm just speaking from my own opinion and in support of T-zones. And I really believe that we need to do all we can to support diversity in housing. And I think if we really want a diverse community, that we need to put our money where our mouth is. We need to stop just saying we want it, and we need to actually do things that help actually increase diversity in our community. And so that's what I'm saying. I'm in support of that. And also, while I'm up here about the residential zoning for, what is it called, R1A, I don't understand why we don't just make duplexes a thing. Because on Lincoln Avenue, we live right down the street from, a few houses down from Arlington County, where there's a whole bunch of duplexes, and they're great. It's a great community. So I just wanted to put a plug in for that, and that's it. And thank you for all you do, and bye.
Thank you.
Pat Kennedy? And Fred Thompson will follow Mr. Kennedy.
Okay. Excuse me. Hi, my name is Pat Kennedy. I live at 300 Lawton Street, and I'd like to address two safety issues that I think need to be taken seriously. One has to do with speed humps, and we've been asking for speed humps and been meeting with city officials in relation to the development that's occurring, at the intersection of Broad and Washington. And they're on the plan, but things are happening on that street now that speed humps really need to be put in there now. Traffic is being diverted onto the street, and there just seems to be a lot more people using that as a way to kind of do a cut-through. So there's 3 to 4 that have been recognized as being needed. I don't know when the intention is to put them in. I'm a little concerned from personal experience on a safety issue that reported that trees were covering a street light right across the street from us, and it took the city 2 years to just trim some holly trees. That's all it took. The light was completely covered, offered no safety at night. So that's the one issue that I would really appreciate, and I'm sure the other residents would, if that could be bumped up. I don't think funding's an issue because I'm seeing money being spent on some stuff I think is pretty frivolous. It's not really safety, like brick sidewalks and the fancy signs, directional signs. It's nice, but there's some serious safety issues. The other one is speed limits, and I personally, I don't know, so I'm asking, who's responsible for setting the speed limits in the city, within the city limits?
Well, I mean, that's the city, I guess the city manager, I mean, I don't know if you'd like to talk about the criteria set for particular things, but what we'll do is let you finish your comments.
Okay.
So typically, this is just you commenting to us, not necessarily, you know.
See, I really don't know, but I just want to say, I honestly think the speed limit ought to be reduced to 20 miles an hour.
Okay.
I know I'm getting older and I don't drive as fast as I might have done in my younger days, but 25 miles an hour on some of these residential streets is too fast. I mean, it's dangerous. In Lawton Street, we have a lot of kids that are being taken to Madison Park. You know, they're in those conga lines crossing the street. I almost got, I'm not kidding, hit by an Uber coming zipping around, going in excess of 20. And I was coming out of the driveway, and the guy had the nerve to pull up and beep his horn at me as I was coming out of the driveway. So that's basically it. Speed humps, speed limit.
Thank you very much, and maybe the city manager can briefly address those during his report, if there's any additional information that he could make a brief comment as to. Madam Clerk?
Yes, and Mr. Thompson would like to wait until you take up the T-zones now?
Sure, all right.
Okay, so we have Genevieve Udar.
Yeah, I was going to wait till the T-zones.
You will wait also? Okay. Mary Chavez?
I will also wait.
And Joseph Scarizzi, which we're going to get that. We're going to get to that.
Probably not.
Thank you.
Hello, Joseph Shrizzi, Gundry Drive. My comments this evening do not represent any organization. Transportation emissions are the leading cause of greenhouse gases in Northern Virginia and also in Falls Church. Most trips in cars are less than 2 miles. So most of our greenhouse gas emissions come from short trips in cars. It's the largest line item for where Falls Church is contributing to climate change. Building dense, walkable neighborhoods where people can walk, bike, and easily get around to meet their daily needs without the need for cars is essential to hitting the greenhouse gas emissions goals that this council has already agreed to and that the region has already agreed to. There is no other way to do it other than getting more cars off the road and increasing micromobility services. The easiest way to do that is increasing density and allowing mixed-use zoning. And changing zoning laws is free. So please increase zoning. Please allow beautiful duplexes and beautiful walkable neighborhoods that we already enjoy many of in Falls Church. A few more would be nice. While we're on this, I think that it's very important that Falls Church adopt a green building policy. We've lost talent and lost some very smart, passionate people who have been contributing to the Environmental Sustainability Council in Falls Church and in other organizations because they feel like they're saying the same comments every time to every new development, and that's really sad that they feel like just monotony and doing the same thing over and over again, instead of having a really strong, updated green building policy that's the default, that every time a new developer comes in, these are the things that we already know, so we don't have to go to voluntary concessions. We don't have to have these comments so late in the process, but having by default, we're building things that we're going to ask for anyway. So spending some time and thinking about that, I think would be a good use of time for this council. Including in green building policy, we should remove all parking minimums. Building a parking space in Falls Church in a new development can cost as much as $50,000. A third of our housing costs are often for many people in apartments and condos. A third of our housing costs is paying for car parking. That's absurd. So update green building policy and adopt that. I also would like to mention that in America, the ratio of the median income to the average home price has never been higher in American history. And what that means is, for a working family, it was easier to buy a house to live in during the Great Depression than it is today in 2022. And that is very sad. Working families are suffering everywhere, and we have a civic responsibility as Americans to make housing more affordable. And any attempt to limit beautiful townhomes from being built is deplorable, selfish, and greedy, and unpatriotic, and really disgusting behavior. So I hope they take that seriously, and take seriously that so many people who live and work in Falls Church are suffering right now because of unaffordable homes. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Madam Clerk, next speaker.
I think that is it for general comments.
All right, well, let's keep on moving then. So next up is council requests. Are there any council requests? Ms. Hardy.
Thank you. Wyatt, in response to one of the comments we received from the CACT, can you give us a status on where we are with the Lincoln-Dorchester crosswalk, as well as I think Virginia and Great Falls also had a traffic calming request, specifically for the corner, I think?
Okay, thank you. So we did have a meeting with the CACT to discuss that intersection. There was general consensus to proceed with the staff recommendation for a pedestrian-activated signal at that intersection. That order right now is before the Federal Highway Association because those particular devices need to have that approval. So that process has started, and as sort of rather than doing it linearly, we're also starting the order process for that equipment. There is a fairly long lead time with it right now, but so it's all in process. I don't have an ETA, so I'll get back with council as soon as we have one, and we'll also communicate that out to the neighbors.
Great. Could you also address what we heard from Mr. Kennedy about the Lawton speeding and speed limit issue?
Yeah, so the city council has had sort of an initial consideration of taking the new authority that was just granted by the General Assembly for local governments to lower speed limits below 25 miles per hour. That was done about 2 years ago. And so we are looking at that right now. We have kind of an initial plan to consider that for our residential streets. We would not use it for our collector streets or for some of the larger streets such as West Street or Lincoln or Great Falls at this current kind of the initial phase, but we would consider it for the smaller residential streets throughout the city. We do need to have good discussions with the police and also with the sort of the judicial system writ large about enforcement of that to make sure that we're all kind of going off the same sheet of music. And so that's also in process. And the City Council has put down a marker by doing an initial appropriation that would fund the installation of new signage for those lower speed limits. So this is a new thing that the General Assembly has granted local governments the authority to consider, and we're in the process of working through the details of that. One thing that the council will need to do, however, is adopt a new ordinance, and so we're working on that. That's on our work plan to bring that to the council over the summer as well.
And the speed humps in particular, is that part of Insight's voluntary concessions to us?
It is, and so I will talk with staff just about what the schedule is for the installation of those speed humps. And if it is late in their construction process, then we might have some consideration of ways we can accelerate that.
In the meantime, since we have police out in the audience, if we could pay special attention to Lawton based on what we were hearing from our residents, that would be great. Thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Thanks very much. Let me follow up on a couple points. Also, from the standpoint of traffic safety, the electronic speed enforcement in school zones, how are we coming with that? Number one. And number two, traffic diversion from Washington and Broad as a result of all the developments. Lawton Street, I suspect a number of other streets are taking that overflow traffic. So what's the overall plan over the next couple years to control that traffic? And I'm pleased to hear that we are moving forward on reducing the speed limit. I look forward to seeing that.
So we are, in terms of construction impacts on Washington Street and on Broad Street, we're at a time where we actually have maximum impacts right now because of the demolition of the taller Robertson building, where for safety's sake, we need to secure the area around that just to make sure that passersby or the traveling public is not harmed by any debris during that demolition process. So that building is coming down this week. We are doing lane closures at night to minimize traffic disruptions, but even during the daytime, we have lane closures, along the sidewalks and along the lane closest to those buildings. Those lanes will then be reopened for the duration of the construction, and then the next sort of major impact for the streets will be when we install the streetscape and the brick paver crossings across both Broad Street and Washington Street, which the developer will do. So that'll be the next phase of major impacts. So for the Lawton neighbors, we are in a moment kind of right now, which I think will be short duration, where we probably are having maximum impacts of drivers trying to find alternate routes, but that should be alleviated in the next 2 weeks. But we will follow up with Lawton neighbors, and I'll talk with Jeff Sykes and staff members who work on traffic calming just to hear what they're hearing from the neighbors and see what we might be able to do to mitigate impacts in the meantime.
Mr. City Manager, let me follow up. I think the impacts are not just on Lawton Street, throughout that street grid. So, and I'm not sure they're going to end with just the demolition of that building. So does the city have a plan for traffic calming, perhaps more enforcement in that street grid in that area?
Well, let me get back with the city council on more things that we can do during the construction period.
And then electronic speed enforcement in school zones?
So we do have a consultant study on that, and if I could follow up with council on the latest on that. I don't have that report in hand yet, but I know that is happening either in late May or early June for a consultant to come in and do a feasibility study on using photo enforcement for speed in our school zones.
Thank you.
All right, any other comments or council requests for the city manager? If not, let's move on to the report of the city manager. Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter. So the headlines for the city manager's report tonight, I'd like to have two items. First, Chief Gavin will provide the community and the city council an update on the implementation of body-worn cameras, and so we will talk about what that means in terms of how the public will interface with that, but also talk about the policy framework that surrounds that implementation. It's certainly not the case where we just deploy the cameras, but instead a great deal of thought, a great deal of planning, and a great deal of policy goes along with that. Before I do turn it over to the chief, let me also note that after the chief's report, we'll get a very brief third quarter financial report from the city's chief financial officer. Chief, before I turn it over to you, let me just note for the public, we are looking forward to welcoming the entire community on Monday for our 40th annual Memorial Day celebration in the City of Falls Church. And so we're looking forward to a fabulous day. It will start at 9 a.m. with the traditional fun run. At 11 a.m., we'll have the ceremony at the Veterans Memorial right in front of the community center. And that ceremony is sponsored and organized by the Veterans Council of Falls Church. And we're very keen to welcome Falls Church's own Navy Captain Shaw Coey, who will be our keynote speaker for that event. And then at 2 o'clock is the parade. So all are welcome, and we look forward to a very fine celebration. Just a note on parking. Parking is a very crowded day in Falls Church, and is very often an issue for people. So we just do ask the public to look carefully at the signs that are on the street before you park your car, and to also note that the Kaiser Garage will be open to the public all day on Memorial Day. So thank you to Kaiser Permanente for offering that to the community. And so for anyone that's out there, if you have any question where to park, you know you can park at the Kaiser parking lot, and that's a very convenient location for all the activities of the day. So with that, now let me turn it over to Chief Gavin for the presentation and demonstration of body-worn cameras.
Good evening, council and the community. It's with deep appreciation, I'm here to unveil the progress for the Use of Force Review Committee's 3 recommendations and how it relates to the body-worn camera program. There was 3 recommendations from the Use of Force Committee. One was the improving oversight and transparency and accountability, which is directly related to the asset of body-worn cameras. The second one was standardizing the need for audio-visual evidence as it relates to reporting use of force from our police force. And third, expanding the information captured in the retention of personnel involved in the use of force. So we're pleased. This is it's been a long project. It's been one that I'd like to just applaud Captain Steve Rao for taking this on from the very beginning. And, you know, as much as we're unveiling it here tonight, I will tell you, we're just starting this process. I mean, this is going to be something that we learn as an organization how to utilize in the best interest of the community, and also working together with our Commonwealth Attorney's Office and figuring out best practices for evidence as it relates to court. And then first, of course, then there's the FOIAs that may be coming into the city in regards to any type of records that need to be released in regards to the body-worn cameras. So without ado, I'm going to introduce Captain Steve Rao, which I'm sure all of you know, and we also have Officer Cody Nguyen here, who is actually demonstrating one of the cameras. So we'll keep it short. Okay.
Are you going to show the video, Ms. Mester?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you come up here with me and we'll.
Hi, I'm Mary Gavin, Chief of Police in the City of Falls Church, and I'm excited to announce that our officers will be equipped with body-worn cameras starting May 2022. Officer body-worn cameras are relatively small devices that record interactions between the community members and law enforcement officers. They work in a similar fashion to our police cruiser dash cameras, which we have had over a decade and will continue to utilize.
The body-worn cameras will be worn on the officer's shirt or vest, securely attached with either a magnet or a clip. The cameras are activated either manually by the officer or automatically when their vehicle's emergency equipment is activated. At the end of each shift, officers will place their body-worn cameras into a transfer station that will automatically upload any footage to a secure server. Recordings cannot be edited, changed, or deleted, either on the camera itself or once downloaded. Body-worn camera footage from a crime or other official police business can sync with the incident details taken by our dispatchers and any related in-car video recordings. Body-worn cameras provide our officers another tool they can use every day to review events and collect evidence that can be used for criminal cases. It also gives residents a more clear and complete picture of what officers do on a daily basis. It's a way to increase transparency and confidence in the criminal justice process.
33 headquarters, Virginia OL, when you're ready.
This is an important undertaking for our city because we want to build upon the good relationship we have established between law enforcement and the community. Body-worn cameras are a great way to add the level of transparency and accountability that the community expects from its police. One of the key objectives defined by the Use of Force Review Committee. I am confident these cameras will build upon our long-standing history of community policing by highlighting the professionalism of the agency while instilling greater public confidence as we continue to hold ourselves accountable to the highest professional standards.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. To begin with, what I'd like to do is I'd ask Officer Nguyen to come up and just kind of walk in front of you, and what you're going to see right in the center of his chest is the body-worn camera. Normally for uniform patrol, it will either be worn directly in the center of the vest or it can also be worn on the pocket. So this is what you're going to see from the uniform officers. Okay, as shown in the video, to activate a body-worn camera outside of the car, all you got to do is just push the button, okay? And as soon as you push that button, the body-worn camera goes red. Go ahead, Cody. Okay, and that shows, you can see the red, and that shows that it's being recorded, okay? And then we turn it off, and it stops. There's other little intricacies that have to be done at this time. Officer Nguyen is now changing he's putting a test, classifying the video as a test and stuff like that. So that would be done at the conclusion of the event when everything is safe. Ms. Mester, if you could pop up those two pictures I sent. So what you see right here is actually the cameras themselves, they work in tandem with associated in-car cameras, okay? If you are driving one of the marked police cars that has an in-car camera, the body-worn cameras actually turns into the microphone, and they work together. When one turns on, the other turns on. So what you see on the left is you actually see the in-car camera, okay, and on the right is the body-worn camera done at the same time. We're not playing the video of this, but what we do and what the officers can do, supervisors could do, is we could play this side by side. And if you look at the next picture, this would be a traffic stop that I had conducted, where you can actually see the in-car camera that shows the officer up at the pickup truck, and then the body-worn camera with the officer conversing with the violator. Okay. Like I said, the body-worn cameras work in tandem with an associated in-car camera that is associated with that officer for that time, for that shift, or they can work standalone. At this time, does anyone have any questions?
Doesn't look like it. It sounds like it's a great plan. When is it going to roll out?
So the cameras are, the officers are wearing the cameras right now.
Okay.
We've had them on for 1 week now. Okay, we've had our general order where, we have our general order out there for the officers. We're working on policies, so to speak. We have a policy, but as you move forward in something like this, you kind of see, not necessarily hiccups, but what's the best way to, what are the best issues with each policy or each line item of the policy that we want to go forward. So we want to make sure that we have a very tight policy. But for the last week, we haven't had any problems.
That's great to know. Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. I think on behalf of the community, thank you for moving forward with this and keeping this a priority since 2020. Quick question. I think Officer Nguyen had to push the button, so does it require an officer to manually turn it on before the camera will start recording, or will it kind of trigger somehow once there's like a traffic stop or some sort of other interaction?
So if your vehicle, if you're driving a vehicle that has a in-car camera, okay, right now we have 8 vehicles with in-car cameras. So all of our officers, sergeants and below on patrol drive a vehicle with an in-car camera. They're called, it's what's called synced to the camera. So if that officer activates their emergency equipment, it automatically turns on the body-worn camera. If the officer pushes the record button inside the car, it activates the body-worn camera. If the officer steps out of their vehicle and sees something and activates their body-worn camera, it activates the in-car camera at the same time.
So if they're in a vehicle without the car cam, then you'd have to manually turn it on.
Yes, they would manually turn it on.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Mr. Duncan?
So what's the record retention and review details that were mentioned earlier? I mean, is everything that an officer does on a shift downloaded onto the secure server, or just episodic, relevant, high-profile events?
So what would be downloaded onto a secure server would be what that officer, when they activated their body-worn camera. So an officer just driving around, an officer just getting out of their car and going into a business just for lunch or for any other thing, if they were not on a police call, that's not being downloaded to a secure server. So a traffic stop, a subject stop, a suspicious person, DUI, criminal event, anything along those lines, we have our officer activate their camera. Then they would turn it off, they would tag it. We have 10 different tags, okay, anything from accident to criminal offense, DUI, traffic stop, a mental health call, mental or medical call, a juvenile call, and those episodic events, as you say, would then be captured from the point of start to the point of stop, okay? And then they would be tagged as such, and then they would be downloaded.
Who performs that function? That's a function that requires some discretion, I assume.
Well,
let's say that the attorney for somebody who was involved in an incident wanted to have access to this film. Do they have to FOIA that, or is that shared with, or how's that work?
So first off, I'm going to go with the download, okay, with the transfer is what we call. So the vehicle, if any video captured on the video from start of the episode to the end of the episode is automatically wirelessly transmitted to the secure server. Okay, we have antennas in the garage, and that goes into there. The body camera goes, you bring your body camera into the station, you drop it into a transfer station, and it automatically downloads to the secure server. Now, if a defense attorney wants to see any video footage, they would actually go through the Commonwealth Attorney, okay, and the Commonwealth Attorney, with all this great technology we have nowadays, they can actually give them a link to watch the video for 30 days, 60 days, however long they need it. If it is needed in a downloaded, exported onto some digital media format, okay, there's also that ability to do that.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting. I think it gives the public a little window into, there's some extra work involved, and there's benefit to the extra work, but nothing comes free. I assume that personnel time has to be devoted to this to some degree, which is appropriate, but it is a fact. Okay, thanks.
All right, Ms. Connolly.
I would also like to say thank you for doing this. I know it was a really big project, and it's a big change in police culture, and I thank you all for being willing to try it and being transparent for the good of the community, for the good of the police force. So I'm looking forward to seeing the results, and I really do appreciate all the hard work that you put into this, so thank you.
I'll say you're welcome for the whole police department, because I think as giving training to all the police officers, I think they're really excited for this also, because it really does, it shows the transparency of the police department, and it protects everybody involved.
All right. Well, unless there's any other questions, again, thank you for sharing this important information to our community, and for the good work and great work you're doing on a day-to-day basis. So thank you both for coming out, or all of you for coming out. Appreciate it. Mr. Shields, do you want to continue on with your report?
Yes, thank you. And now let me call on Ms. Bawa, who will give just a brief update with our third quarter financial report. And I see Ms. Bawa is on the meeting, and let me just let her know she's muted if she's trying to speak. So while we wait for Ms. Bawa, I will go ahead and get some of the highlights of the third quarter financial report. I think just a couple of things that we want to touch on. One, this is just a regular report that we do provide for the City Council. As we were putting together the budget for FY '23, which Council adopted just 2 weeks ago, we obviously factor in the revenue forecasts, and at that time we had about 8 months of revenue forecast, revenue data, which went into the FY '23 budget forecast. And so now we have 9 months of the third quarter report. So kind of one of the key things on the revenue side, what is very apparent is that the local economy has is in the process of bouncing back from the COVID pandemic in a very strong manner. Almost all of our revenues now, with the exception of our hotel taxes, are back above pre-COVID levels. We are expecting at this time, at the third quarter report, that our revenues will exceed the budget by about $2.6 million, or 4.8% of budget. So that's very positive news, an indication of a recovery in our local economy. We do also suspect that there is some inflation in those numbers as well, because they do reflect restaurant activity, meals taxes, business licenses, and sales taxes. The other thing that I would note in this report is just on the expenditure side, we are projecting currently about $300,000 of underspending, but it is a little bit early days as we work through our final contractual obligations and things like that for the current fiscal year. So I'll stop the financial report there, and I'm happy to answer any questions. This report does have a summary of current fund balances and projected year-end fund balances, and an indication of what our drawdown is of the ARPA allocations that have been made so far. Let me pause there and answer any questions.
So is Ms. Bauer going to do a presentation, or are we going to?
No, it's just going to be a very quick verbal report, so essentially I've given it.
Okay.
And hopefully she'll join to answer any questions that council might have, but that's the extent of the report.
Okay. Questions from
Mr.
Ms.
Chairman, I'm
Hiscott?
here.
What's that?
I'm sorry, I had to step away for a second, I missed it, but I'm here if there are any questions.
All right. That was
Impeccable timing as well.
That was convenient. Okay, so let's start with Ms. Hiscott.
Could you further detail the ARPA expenditures? Because when you look at that chart, we're clearly significantly underspending on what we've allocated. And while I know, for instance, the stormwater is intended to be used, that's $7 million number, I just wanted to get an update on, is it just timing? That's why we haven't seen the expenses associated with that? Or are there areas that we should be looking at reallocating to other ARPA expenses?
Ms. Bauer, do you want to answer that question?
Yes, sure. So for the larger appropriations that we have for projects, including stormwater, those projects are still in design phase, and a significant amount of expenditures are expected in next fiscal year onwards. And some of the smaller ones where we had appropriated that have started drawing down, but there are also some projects, for example, the funding that we had set aside for emergency assistance. Since the state started providing that assistance, we don't necessarily need that much amount of money. We had some funding set aside for transportation. That's another area for Fairfax County. That's another area where we may not need some of that funding. Additionally, we had some good amount set aside for social distancing requirements like the masks and things like that. So we are still probably not going to spend as much as we had projected at that time. Sorry?
What is the time, like when will we reassess and reallocate? What did you anticipate the appropriate timing to be for that?
So this is literally the first report that we submitted to the U.S. Treasury. We will be doing this report on an annual basis to them for their guidance. However, we will be looking at this as part of the first budget amendment of the next fiscal year, which is the timeline is fall, September, October. So that's about the time when we would have a better idea of the funding that has been allocated, how much it has been drawn down, and also a look at the funding that has been allocated as part of the fiscal year 2023 budget that was approved.
Okay, thank you very much on ARPA. And then just a quick point, running down the expenditures. There are a couple that really jump out in terms of the increase in expenditures. Like the first line item is a 94% difference from FY21 third quarter. That's on legislative. Could you just walk through the 975, 159 actual year to date versus a year ago, 501, 638? What's the delta of that for roughly $400,000? Yeah, so the first line under expenditures.
Oh, yeah. Oh, hold on one second.
There are a couple, if you just look at the percent difference, that would be good to know why there's such a large difference, legislative and Commissioner of Revenue.
So Commissioner of Revenue, I know that they had, 1 second. They're more fully staffed. They had 2 vacancies last year, and this year they have filled out all their vacancies, and they had a couple of promotions in there as well. So that's pretty much where they're at. On the legislative, we have, this is a comparison with the Arlington contract, which has been paid earlier this year for the legislative. So it's the timing issue when we do the third quarter. Sometimes we pay it in April or May, and this year we have paid it earlier. The contract to Arlington Legal was paid out in March, so it's showing as part of an expenditure here.
So for the complete fiscal year, you anticipate it being relatively neutral, which is how we can be underspending at the end of the year. That makes more sense. And then I have a really small question on, there's like $4,000 request for plants. Just a small issue that on our Public Utilities Commission call last week, there were a couple citizens commenting that we ran out of funding for rain barrels, which I hadn't heard. I don't know if that's the case or if we've been turning away requests for rain barrels, which seems like a super simple way to make an environmental impact and retention of water on single-family homes. So I just want to note that if that is the case, I want to add some funding for that. It's really nominal. I want to make sure that we're supporting that. It's a lot easier to spend that than the $7 million on pipes underneath. We can make some inexpensive and critical differences there. So I just want to put that comment out there. If that is in fact the case, and if it's not, then we can go back to the citizens and say, no, there is funding for those. Let's please apply for them. Okay, those are my questions for the moment. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Other questions, comments? Mr. Snyder?
Thanks a lot. Cindy, could you go back to the slide on the reserves? Right, thanks. So if you take the general fund, the unassigned fund balance, we've gone from 20-some million down to 17 and used well, first of all, how did we use the 3 million? And the second thing I want to get to is that's a pretty significant reduction in a time when inflation is going up. We have major debt that's yet to be repaid. So tell me a little bit about that. Never mind that okay, 16.9%, 17% may be the target, but is this a responsible action, or should we not be thinking about some of the money instead of pushing it out the door in more expenditures, which is the action proposed later, but rather use that to refund some of the reserves?
if I may address that. So Councilmember Snyder, this $3,043,000 is the underspending from fiscal year 2021. So when we come back to you in September, October timeframe with the year end, and then we appropriate it. So as far as the books go, we show it as going into fund balance and coming out of fund balance. So that's the $3 million that the council already appropriated. Portion of it was spent for bonuses and salaries and for DPW equipment, trucks. There was some money set aside for climate change mitigation for the committee plan. I'm just picking out a few things, and there was some revenue share that was done. There was 473,000 cent put in the capital reserve. So there was money set aside for compensation studies. So this $3,043,000 has been expended. And that's why it's kind of showing.
Right, no, I'm aware of that. My question really relates to the next action we're going to be taking. Well, first of all, to illustrate that we have reduced our reserves a significant amount. And then the next question is, should some of the projected surplus be used to replenish those reserves rather than pushed out the door in additional expenditures?
So we had a reserve of around 17 million last year. And then when we ended fiscal year 21, we had excess revenue of 3 million, including that was revenue as well as underspending. And we ended the year with extra 3 million. So we were, to start with, we were at target at 17%. And then the council appropriated all the 3 million, and then we ended up at target. So it wasn't drawing out of the balance, it was just appropriating the surplus left after the fiscal year 2021 financial results.
Well, so I guess my question is that target, considering current situation, considering the debt load, considering the need to maintain our bond rating and all those other factors, is that 17% still the target we should have, or should it be more and increased?
So the target of 17% as far as unassigned fund balance is where we want to be. So that is good. And then in addition to that, we also make sure that our available fund balance is at 20%, which we indeed are. And that is the total available fund balance that you see in the 30 million balance in the bold at the bottom. So because the financial policy says that in the years where we have debt service that exceeds total expenditures by over 12%, then we have to come to that 20% target. So for that reason, and that is for the total available fund balance. And we're expected to come out of that in the next 2 fiscal years, I think. Oh, actually, no, till in fiscal year 26, because there's another clause on the payback ratio. So that one, with the given debt service on the high school, we're not going to come out of it till fiscal year 26.
And so do your calculations include the assumption of full payment on time regarding the West End development?
That's correct, but when we modeled it, we had a 2-year delay modeled in that as well.
Thank you.
Other comments?
Have we had to,
Go
my
ahead.
turn, sorry. Have we had to invoke that 2-year delay at any point in the project so far?
No, because we did add a few months. However, we are within the fiscal year after closing at the end of April. So as far as the payment schedule goes, we're on schedule.
Okay, so thank you. So the plan of finance for the school and the city as a whole is to have an unassigned fund balance component of 17%, which is where we're at. and a total available fund balance of 20%, which is what that 31,868,725 figure represents. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. I just wanted to talk a minute or two with you about the other number that jumps out at me, which is on the first page, roughly 2.67 million, or 4.8% of the budget, exceeding revenue projections. So, and I know it was an unusual year that we've just lived through. Is your experience in the past that we would be at 4.8%, 5%, or is that a number that in past years and perhaps in more normal future years might be lower, so that we would not end up basically having 5 cents on the tax rate washing around in a revenue excess of projections?
Typically, we have been around the 1%, 2% kind of zone in the past. With COVID, projections have become a little bit, I mean, a little bit is an understatement, challenging. We've done our best, and then there have been waves of COVID coming back and forth, so projections have been challenging. I think this 5%, I'm not saying it is going to be every year to this magnitude. However, a lot of the pandemic-related projections, and then waiting to see how the revenues are going to rebound back, and the timing of that, which has probably played a big factor in this larger than normal year-end balance.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Just one other thought. The Black Swan event, whatever it might be, we're trying to plan for it in terms of the West End development with the 2-year cushion, as you mentioned. What else is out there? Is the grocery tax uncertainty remaining as the biggest unknown and the biggest concern, which hopefully will be resolved pretty soon? But is there anything bigger than that we should be keeping an eye on?
That was definitely one of the ones that was a high priority when we were developing the budget. I do want to make sure that as far as forecasts go, pandemic was one, and then grocery tax was, and then the inflation that we're in, some of the costs of services that we're going to get. We've tried to address this as best as we could forecast given the current circumstances in the 23 budget. However, when we look at it at the first quarter results, we'll see how those play out. And if that is continuing to stay, we will see some more interest rate increases that could factor in also in some of the revenue indicators that we see. So that, and the quarterly results help us keep all those factors in place.
Okay, so pandemic, grocery tax, and inflation would be your 3 bogeys to keep an eye out for in the next, 60 to 120 days particularly.
You've summed it up well, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Dave?
Okay, Ms. Hardy, and then
Thank you. I had the same question with Debbie about the ARPA kind of underspending. My only request is I know that we're putting together that report that Kieran showed us, a true up on an annual basis for Fed. I think we probably need to look at it more frequently than that, and ideally synced up with our budget schedule, so we're not making decisions on appropriations with ARPA and then making a separate round of appropriations for the budget. So I probably would suggest maybe in budget finance, you all could discuss a more frequent review of where we are and then potential reallocation, maybe twice a year. So thank you in advance for taking that on Budget and Finance Committee. My second question, if we can go back to the reserve chart, that would be helpful. Thank you, Kieran, for the refresh on the unassigned fund balance of the $3 million that we appropriated last year. Does that $11 million number on the capital reserve include the $4.5 million payment from West Falls Church from this year? Because this is fund balance as of 2021, June 30th.
So the 2022 plan net takes into account the addition of 4.5 and then the use of 4, and then I think we got the 1.4 for the
Parking lot.
Parking lot,
Yep.
yeah. So all that is incorporated in that, yes.
Got it. And it's kind of a wash, other than the 1 million, 1 point whatever for the parking lot, the sale of the parking lot, right?
Mhm.
Because of the planned usage to pay down debt service. I think I heard you say that our reserve policy is 20% and we exceed those various debt to expenditure thresholds. Is that correct? The total available.
20% total available fund balance.
Yep, and our total available fund balance is at 31.8 million. As I recall, our recently adopted FY23 budget now is 112 million total. So that
Yeah,
brings our total available fund balance to 26%, so that's 6% above target, correct?
That's correct.
Great. And I know that obviously no one can read the tea leaves, and there are lots of potential bogeys out there, but that feels like a pretty healthy cushion. So that's something I think we can feel good about. Second question related to kind of FY23. So how does the rosy revenue picture that you talked about, so expecting that we're going to come out ahead at 2.7 million or so when we true everything up after June 30th, how does that new data change our thinking, if at all, on FY23 revenue projections, the budget that we just adopted 3 weeks ago?
Yeah, so 23 budget projections were based on the 8 months of data that we had ending in February. And we had already seen an upward trend in almost all the categories at that time, some more fast, rigorous, and some of the others. And we had taken into account all those upward trends while we were doing the development of the next year's revenue projection. So we're pretty much on track with the year-end projections that seem to have been factored into the next year's budget projections.
Got it. Okay, well, that's good to hear, because while I know that having year-end surpluses is sometimes a good thing, I actually make sure that we come in closer to target, because when we have year-end surpluses, we end up expending it as one-time money, and I want to make sure that we are funding all the departments well, and that we don't end up with kind of one-time kind of structural issues, because we end up spending it one-time money as opposed to keeping on the operating budget. So I look forward to that true-up when we get to it at the end of the year. Thank you.
Ms. Leon?
Hi, Ms. Bawa. The question I have is on revenue and expenditures. There's a reference to we've collected roughly 61% of total budget and revenues. Is it normal for us that 39% is captured in the last quarter of the year? Is that how it normally flows, or is this? Sorry,
Yes, that's
I'm looking
correct.
at Wyatt and asking Ms. Bawa.
Yeah,
So
that's
sorry
fine.
about that.
So
Yeah.
that is correct.
Okay.
We do have a lot of activity in the last quarter. Paving, because of the spring and kind of summer months coming on,
Yeah.
that's the quarter where we spend a lot of the purchase orders are done and expended in the
Okay.
last quarter. There are other contracts that expire. Normally depends on when the annual renewal is, but we do have some technology contracts that expire in May and June. So it is a heavy quarter as far as the percentage goes.
Got it.
And just to put into perspective, last year we were just about at 60% also. So it is kind of normal
Okay. So
to not be at right 75% for the 3/4 of the year.
good to know. Wonderful that meals taxes, business licenses, and other taxes are rebounding back to pre-pandemic levels. It's wonderful to hear that there's some resiliency that's being reflected in our businesses as a result of that statement. When we talk about real estate appeals and the volume of that increasing this year, just given with the value of the real estate market, how much of this surplus is at risk because we've got a higher volume of real estate appeals coming in this year than normal?
So the appeals are on the assessed value.
Yep.
And any adjustments that are made would, of course, affect the collection, the taxes collected in the next fiscal year. We do have a budget of $400,000 for abatements that we typically set aside. And we have normally come below that target in most years. And at this point, I'd like to mention that the property values have gone up, not just in Falls Church. This has been a trend across the nation. I have some sense of how the appeals are moving along. We have 130 appeals. By no means we are anywhere close to reviewing all of them at this point, but there could be some corrections. There are some nominal corrections, but there aren't, when there are properties where some portion of the property is in our database shows it has been done or it hasn't been done. So those corrections are being made as we move along. However, whether it'll have an impact on our budget that's going to exceed 400,000, I'm not at that point yet. I don't believe that yet.
Understood, appreciate that. When we talk about the departments, many, not all, are expected to exhaust their budgets. For the ones that are underspending, are we touching base with those departments to make sure that there's awareness, that there's an understanding of why around that? I'm concerned that some of our larger departments, if they ask for the money, the accountability to spend it is also just as important. Are we having those conversations? Wyatt, perhaps
Yes.
that's a question for you. Okay.
Yeah. So the department directors meet with finance as well as the city managers on a regular basis. We do look at their budget. We on a quarterly basis, some of the larger ones a bit more frequently than quarterly, some even on a monthly basis. And sometimes it is there are things like vacancy savings or other factors that come in for those underspendings. And normally it is your non-personnel budget that needs to be expended. And this year, particularly supply chain and the timing of ordering, we are trying to make sure that, contracts for goods are placed well in advance of the June 30th deadline to make sure the current year balances are expended in a timely manner. So yes, we're working on it.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll just add just a little bit of color to that. Public Works is one in particular where we have conversations throughout the year to make sure that we're delivering all the things that we promised that are in the budget. Human Services is another area where those dollars are going out to help families or to help people in need or provide services. So that's another one. Many of the other budgets are very personnel driven, and so it's going to be largely based on, do they have vacancies, or are they fully staffed?
All right. Unless there's anything else, why don't we move on? Mr. Snyder, do you have one additional?
Yeah, just one of the negative potential developments that Councilmember Duncan mentioned was the loss of the grocery tax. How much would that cost us in the next fiscal year if that occurred?
So we are forecasting that. Ms. Bauer, what is the latest number? It's 1.8 million?
It's 1.7 in 23 and 1.9 in fiscal year 24.
Okay, so the significance of that can't be sort of underestimated, right? Or overestimated, depending on what you want to do. Anyway, it's important, right?
It is important, and as Cindy has been noting for the Legislative Committee and for Council, the General Assembly will be coming back into session on June 1, and so we hope to have some clarity on that picture soon, after Memorial Day.
All right, unless there's anything else on this item, why don't we move to business on the agenda? Madam Clerk, will you call the first item?
Yes. We have a TO 22-09, ordinance to amend Chapter 48 zoning to combine transitional districts, eliminate single-family and two-family residential use therein, allow for a townhouse, apartment, and condo option, and allow for expanded lot coverage.
Mr. Shields, who's handling this?
Mr. Stoddard will handle this. The request tonight is to gather public comment on this, to hold a public hearing, and we'll do that after the staff report and discussion with staff on this draft ordinance. And the request tonight also is to refer it out to the Planning Commission so that some of the remaining issues can be worked out in a public and systematic way with the Planning Commission. But that is the request tonight. Let me turn it over to Mr. Stoddard for an introduction and staff report on this item.
May I interrupt for one moment, please? Before, there's a motion on the ordinance that we were just discussing the budget. Am I missing?
That's, I thought, for later. Is that,
That's
Mr.
just the
Shields?
time and we do it later?
Yeah, so we just provided a third quarter fiscal report.
Okay,
and
okay, sorry.
and
I just thought we were passing over that and not voting on it.
So and then the budget item will come in after the zoning item.
Thank you. Apologies for the interruption. Just want to make
No.
sure we weren't passing that.
No worries at all. Mr. Stoddard?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Shields. Thank you, Mayor Tarter and members of council. Paul Stoddard, Planning Director with City of Falls Church. Happy to give tonight's staff report on the proposed changes to the T-zones, the transitional zones. Right there on line 3 of the staff report, it does note that there are some changes since you all last saw this material at your work session last week, May 16th. And there are some notable ones that I will step through. As Mr. Shields said, the request is for council to hear public comment and to consider first reading and referral out to the Planning Commission on the proposed changes. I will summarize the proposed changes, which begins on line 9. These are largely things you've seen before, but since it's before you for action, I just want to quickly note them. First, district consolidation of the T1 and T2 zones, as was recommended by the Zoning Ordinance Advisory Committee, ZOAC. Eliminating single family line as a by right use. Line 16, expanding the allowable commercial uses. Largely it mimics what's in B1, but with some reductions. Number 4 on line 21, extending the allowances for townhouse and multifamily. With the noted change where any townhouse or multifamily project as part of that use, at least 10% of the units would have to be committed as affordable or workforce housing. There would also be another 2 more restrictions. One you saw before, which was lots less than 1 acre in size. And then the second one is an adjustment from last time, and that is that there would be no lot frontage allowable on North Washington Street, but it would be allowable on other streets, and I can explain that when we get to the zoning map deeper in the report. Number 5 on building heights, no changes. There's from when you last saw it, an increase in the allowable building heights, and then also an increase, again, no changes since you last saw it, an increase in the allowable lot coverage and a reduction in the setbacks. Notable changes on line 30, beginning on line 38. As I mentioned, the frontage restriction is adjusted to only include North Washington. Side and rear yard setbacks, and I'm on line 40 of the staff report. Side and rear yard setbacks, since you last saw this, are increased to 10 feet in consideration of either existing multifamily or the potential for multifamily on adjacent sites. Line 42, several added exhibits, an updated zoning map, a hypothetical build out, as well as a hypothetical application review schedule, all in response to council requests. Let's see, line 44, as I mentioned, the adjustment to the definition of the conditional use to include 10% committed affordable or workforce housing units. And then line 47 is something of a cleanup item, and that's removing the by right process for accessing the mixed use overlay to MUR floating overlay zoning district. Let's see, line 51, staff recommendation is for adoption of the proposed motion, which of course is for first reading. Background, line 54, I just want to touch on this again. This is in February of 21 where council provided direction to staff to develop a process for small residential projects on infill sites. And then line 62, the staff response to consider T-zones because of their intent to serve as a transition between commercial and exclusively residential districts, and to accommodate development of the T-zones, which have otherwise been difficult to do. I'm going to jump down to line 79. This is the first of the new exhibits. This is an updated zoning map let's see, on line 79, I don't know if we can get that up on the screen, but it's thank you. It's a color-coded map. So all the zones except the T zones have been grayed out on this one. So the T, and if we slide down just a little further, it'll pick up the T zone on Roosevelt. Thank you. So these are that's perfect. So these are in purple are the T zones, either T1 or T2 today. The acreage counts are for contiguous parcels of property zone T, meaning it's not split by some other parcel with another zoning designation or by a street. And so this, I mentioned I would talk about why North Washington is still included in the restrictions, and this map shows it. So there's a zoning pattern along North Washington today where there are large acreages of T zones, and this proposal isn't meant to supplant the existing SE process. And so North Washington is still where there are large tracts of T-zone property, which the small area plan would suggest should either stay as they are or go through some sort of more comprehensive public engagement and seek a special exception. The remaining T-zone parcels, whether they're on Park Avenue, South Washington Street, Hillwood, or Roosevelt, are generally smaller in nature. And so likely wouldn't pursue a special exception process otherwise. Rolling forward through the staff report on line 98, this is where this introduces the second graphic that council had requested. This is a hypothetical build out, and we can actually scroll to the top of the next page. And this is where the graphic actually appears. So this is a hypothetical maximum development scenario. This one on the top half of the graphic is what can be done under T-zones today. So for commercial uses, what's allowable is a maximum height of 45 feet. There's a minimum front yard setback of 15 feet and a maximum building coverage of 40%. And what's shown is that there are rear setback requirements of 15 feet and side yard of 10. But when you combine the lot, a typical lot of a half acre with the building coverage allowance, what you end up with is a building sort of in the corner, and then there is no impervious surface coverage limit. So what you could do under a maximum development scenario today is to pave the rest of the lot to use as parking for the building. The second half of this graphic, if we scroll down just a little bit, is a maximum build out scenario for what's proposed. So here it's a height increase from 45 feet to 50 feet, and it includes a step back where it's adjacent to R, and that's depicted here. Same minimum front setback requirement of 15 feet. And then of course the minimum lot requirement, minimum yard requirements are reduced. And they're reduced to an extent where it's likely that someone, if they were to pursue maximum development, would not install on-site parking, and they instead tuck it inside or underneath the building. And so what's depicted is a two-way drive aisle is 23 feet. So once you take away 23 feet, there may or may not be room even left for on-site parking. You might be able to squeeze in a spot depending on the lot configuration. That's just a hypothetical. The review process, a hypothetical review process, there's a chart for that at line 110. So the chart, the column on the left is the special exception process that's used today, and it's approximately at its fastest is an 11-month process, including multiple work sessions with council, boards and commissions, planning commission. And what's proposed is a hypothetical scenario for review schedule for this SUP process is at its fastest an 8-month process with work sessions by the planning commission, architectural advisory board, and of course the council. So that's a comparison of what those two timings could look like. And then if we jump to the timing section of the report. This has also changed from your last work session. So responding to direction from council to have a more engaged process with the planning commission. What's proposed is 5 sessions with the planning commission, both of their June meetings, both of their July meetings, as well as their first August meeting, to include a series of technical work sessions with the planning commission, as well as listening sessions with the general public, as well as other boards and commissions. And then coming back again is requested by council to come back in the fall instead of in the summer, returning to council. So that's the end of the report, but there are some notable changes to the code that I want to step through as well. And again, changes since your last work session are highlighted in gray. So I'll be able to move through most of this relatively quickly. Line 154, intent, largely no change, just some minor wording. Line 160, principal uses permitted by right. There is the one cleanup item I mentioned on lines 191 and 192, where the allowance for MUR, mixed-use residential, as a by right use is struck. Line 197 begins conditional uses permissible by special use permit. At lines 210 through 212 is the clarification where the conditional use of townhouse and multifamily would need to include a 10% commitment to affordable housing. Lines 223 and 224, just completing that cleanup to strike MUR as an allowable by right use. Let's see, if we jump down to line 304, this is the additional regulations for specific conditional uses. Part 1, of course, is for special use permits approved by council. Again, it's at lines 311 through 313. It's the drive-throughs, assisted living, and then townhouses and multifamily and T districts. Lines 318 through 324 include, again, all those restrictions, the requirement for the 10% affordable housing, and then the restrictions on no frontage along North Washington and sites less than 1 acre. Line 326, no changes through here. This is all the language related to drive-throughs, which I mentioned last time is a copy and paste, and it's being moved for cleanup. That continues all the way down to line 603. All right, part 2, again, this is special provisions for SUPs. Part 2 is related to SUP, special use permits approved by the Board of Zoning Appeals, the BZA. No changes here, just cleanups. Let's see, all the drive-through ticks gets moved. And then we jump down to line 930. And line 930 is the setback table for T districts, B districts, M districts, MUR, and then the OD. MUR and OD are overlays. I'm sorry, OD is a district, MUR is an overlay. And here the clarification, just on that first line, you can see those two little number 10s, just clarifying that the side yard and rear yard are increased from where you saw last time. Last time they were 5 feet. What's here tonight is 10 feet. Further down in the line 931, just clarifying where the setbacks are calculated from, measuring them from the curb for the front yard is consistent with how we measure the front setbacks for B uses, and then clarifying that we would always use the lot line for side and rear. And then also on footnote 1, just clarifying that adjoining the step back requirement from residential, it considers both if it's directly adjacent as well as across the street. And I think that concludes the changes from last time. So as just to close out where I started, the request is for council to review, consider public comment, and then also consider first reading and referral out to the Planning Commission. I'm happy to conclude the report there and take any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So I know we have some public comment, and I imagine we have some questions as well. Why don't we go ahead and move on to public comment? Let's take our public comment, then we'll get into
Yes, we'll start with Fred Thompson, followed by Genevieve Udar.
Okay. I want to address my concern about a first reading. My understanding of that process is it really kicks off a legislative process, and once there's a first reading, then there's a second reading, and then there's an act. And based on what I've seen and heard discussed so far, I don't think there's been enough public engagement to really begin the legislative process. And our view is that we should start that public engagement now through the Planning Commission, through other bodies, and we should get a robust sense of what the community thinks about this and how it might impact them. And I outline at the end of some comments I've submitted to you today some of the things I think could be done, like contacting all of the affected property owners, posting in the neighborhoods, having multiple discussions about that. Our concern really relates to the intensity of development. The provision calls for buildings coming from that are now limited to 35 or 45 feet, going up to 50 feet, which is near the B zone level, and only 4 foot lower than our building at the Broadway. I should have said 502 West Broad Street, Unit 509 in the Broadway. And also allow intensity of development from 40% of a lot to 80% of a lot setback, which would normally be at the back of a building from 40 feet down to 10 feet. So much more intense development. And our sense is it's not really required in terms of the objectives that the council itself has identified. If you looked at the enlarging the tax base, diversity of housing, the missing middle, all of the things that have been talked about in these work sessions, those things can be done with lower levels of density than are identified here. We firmly believe that. And we're not opposed to increased diversity of housing, increased approaches to how we deal with housing in the city, but we think that you also need to look at its impact on neighbors and citizens that live in multi-use buildings. One of the things I wanted to bring to the city's attention is not just that I think this should be looked at the Planning Commission, but the Planning Commission should also look at how multi-use residents are treated in the zoning code. And this might have come as a result of my digging through 6 pages of discussion of drive-throughs. There are restrictions on drive-throughs, but they all relate to how they connect to residential properties. There are restrictions on screening for headlights in a parking lot, but once again, only relate to residential properties. We are residents. We live in a property multi-use building, and you're discussing adding more diversity, adding more such properties. I think it's important for the Planning Division to look at the code itself to see if we're protecting all of our citizens, all of our residents, noise, lighting, encroachment of nearby buildings, all of the issues that would apply to residential houses also apply to other residents that live in multifamily buildings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk?
Genevieve Udar, and followed by Mary Chavez.
Awesome. Thank you. I was about to say good morning and then realized it very much is not. My name is Genevieve Udar. I've been a resident of City of Falls Church for more than 10 years, and I currently live at 213 Lawton Street, bordering the T1 zones on North Washington Street. I am, I think, a big ditto for what was just said, actually. Very supportive of helping address the diversity of housing in our city, but just have a few concerns with the current approach being taken from what I understand of it. I think one of the key things is really around the transparency, and I think I've heard actually from a couple of council members the concerns as well in terms of addressing and engaging with the public. So I think just better awareness of what's happening, what does it mean, what is the good, what is the bad, and how are we working together to really come together with a solution. The other part that I have concerns on is that some of the changes being proposed just seem very excessive, and I think intensity was a really great word, but even bordering on reckless. Increasing the lot coverage from 40% to 80% seems to fall out of line with even some advice from various experts that have been engaged by the city, and even some of the neighboring localities and some of the approaches that they're taking. It also seems to ignore any potential impact that would be created from the level of coverage that would impact then trees, landscaping, privacy, setbacks, and even vehicle parking, which being on Lawton Street right now, parking, traffic, and speeding are pretty high concerns for us. I would just ask council to consider all of these comments and appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for yours. Madam Clerk?
And Mary Chavez.
Mayor Tartar, members of the council. My name's Mary Chavez. I live at 215 Lawton Street, bordering the T1 lots along North Washington Street. In addition to the letters already written to council, this evening I would like to emphasize 3 points, and I've modified these slightly. So if you have the text, it's a bit different. The purpose of the proposed T-zone changes is to facilitate small residential projects on small infill sites, as council requested of staff in early 2021. However, even though the proposed special use provisions for townhouses, condominiums, and apartment buildings are not extended to North Washington Street, the code changes would also govern any by right uses for all the transition lots. By expanding the area that buildings can cover as a percent of the lot, raising the allowed height, and reducing the setback provisions. That applies to all the lots, to both the new provisions for townhouses, condominiums, and apartment buildings, but also to all other by right uses automatically by changing the code in the chart that you have at the very end of the code changes. As a 43-year resident of the city, I expect the proposed changes would affect the use and enjoyment of my property and likely diminish its value. A narrower, special exception style approach might more precisely meet the city's stated objective without affecting all by right uses. Second point, the expansion of proposed building coverage for all T1 lots from 40 to 80% is dramatic and excessive. Why 80% coverage and not the 50% coverage originally proposed by Susan Bell, the city's zoning consultant? Arlington's approach to missing middle housing focuses on 56% coverage. 80% coverage opens the door for developers to build more expensive units, not truly diverse housing, such as duplexes and quads that Arlington is focusing on. Finally, I emphasize the need for notification, and I urge you not to pass this at this point. Take a closer look at the potential impacts of the proposal, narrow its terms to the targeted goal, and notify neighbors and the public well in advance of your next first reading. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk?
That's all I have right now.
All right. To council comments and council questions. Comments for staff? Questions, Ms. Connolly?
I do have, I'll start with one question and then
Okay.
maybe come back later. And that is with this, Mr. Stoddard, the original intent of this was to combine our T-zones so we would just have a single T-zone, and it seems like we're going to end up with 3 T-zones if this goes through. Is that, is that what we're doing?
So as proposed, the language for the T-zone districts is collapsed into one T-zone. There would be, so all the T-zones would have access to the same by right uses, as well as the same lot coverages and building dimensions. The only thing that would change is the conditional use for multifamily would be allowable so long as you weren't on North Washington Street. So it's still one district, but then some, I guess if you wanted to consider it two, there would be some T-zone parcels that would have access to the multifamily conditional use.
Okay, thanks.
Can I just tag on to that? Paul, if you can clarify again from the comments from Ms. Chavez about by right exclusions. What you just said, what I heard you just say was that conditional use if not on North Washington. That's the only time you could have conditional use.
Correct. The conditional use for the multifamily,
For the
yes,
multifamily.
would be allowable when you were not on North Washington, correct.
So can you comment on Ms. Chavez's concern about the exclusions, that the by right would even impact North Washington? What would the impact of that be on North Washington?
Sure.
If you can be real, make sure we all understand the same thing.
Yeah, so the comment is correct, that as proposed, the lot coverage expansion as well as the setback reduction would apply to all T-zones, including North Washington. So North Washington wouldn't be eligible for multifamily, but it would be eligible for a larger building.
Can I just ask one more? That larger building could not be a single-family home, though?
No, single family would be
Okay.
struck as a allowable use.
Single families.
No single family, no multifamily, but the current, so for instance, Sunrise or existing buildings.
Yeah, that would still be allowable. The by right uses are laid out. Let me just find the right line item so I can point everyone to it. Here we go. If we're able to jump to line 168 in the staff report, actually 164 shows the struck uses. So single family would no longer be allowable. And then townhouses are moved out of being a by right use, and they're moved into a conditional use only. And then what continues to be an allowable by right use, public buildings and facilities, churches, parish houses, school and daycare facilities, non-commercial clubs, residential institutions, group homes for no more than 8 individuals, professional offices, clinics for human care is added, restaurants are added, and then a variety of commercial uses, which begins on line 177 there. And so those would all be allowable in all of the T-zones, including those on North Washington.
Sure.
I would,
Go ahead, Paul.
Oh, I was just going to say that part of what's going on here in the shift with the allowable uses is to try and move the T-zones away from being just a further extension of single-family zoning. So economically, single-family zoning tends to be a very appealing use for builders. And so the idea is to remove single-family as a by right use and to instead expand by right uses to include a variety of other commercial uses. There are certainly several successful small offices running in the T-zones, especially along Park Avenue. And as was mentioned, the assisted living facility, the houses of worship. And so all those would remain and could continue, and the door would be open to more commercial uses as by right options.
Paul, while we're talking about North Washington, I heard you explain the reason why there's still a carve-out to not allow multifamily residential on the North Washington T-zones is because of the concern that the assemblage of the parcels could be too big, and therefore that merits a more special exception-like process, correct?
Correct.
So in your description, I'm trying to find the line item now, we kind of call out that this would only be relevant if you're less than 1 acre in size. So wouldn't that, in essence, take care of that concern? Because in order for you to do something on those North Washington parcels, you'd probably be over the 1 acre, and therefore that would trigger a special exception process if they wanted to redevelop, as opposed to using a T-zone process.
Right. So it's a double restriction, and the protection that the North Washington frontage is providing is that someone couldn't come in and subdivide off, say, 1 acre of their T-zone parcel. So today they've got a fairly contiguous set of land. It's in a fairly large acreage, which would make it a good candidate for an SE. And then because of this district, they're incentivized to subdivide off, say, the corner or a piece of the frontage, and then we're left with sort of an orphan larger parcel.
So
And
they
so
could
that's
do,
what that frontage protection is for.
and so they could do that, and there's no lawful restriction in someone subdividing their land, at least not that I'm aware of, but maybe the city attorney could elaborate.
Correct. They could subdivide it, but they still wouldn't have access, because they'd still have North Washington frontage, they wouldn't have access to the townhouse style development.
So that's dependent on the fact that it requires North Washington frontage, not necessarily by the size of the lot.
Correct.
So let's say Sunrise, I'll pick on them because they have a big surface parking lot, decides to carve out their parking lot and put 5 brownstones up, or condos or townhomes, on what would be a parking lot. We're saying that we wouldn't allow this because of this exclusion on North Washington.
Yes, that's the way it's drafted, yes.
And so I actually don't think that's a terrible use compared to, if parking lots there, that's obviously serves, some need, but if they don't meet the parking lot, I think adding kind of a housing type that we need in the city is not a bad thing. And so I kind of go back to the original spirit of what we're trying to do, which is a unified T-zones. I think Mary Beth's comment about kind of, by doing this carve-out, we kind of create like another unique T-zone, where you have T1, T2, maybe they'll be unified under T, but except the asterisk is, except that you can't do it on North Washington. So I think especially if we're at first reading, I'd rather consider kind of the broad version. And certainly the Planning Commission can discuss whether carving out North Washington would make sense. But similar to how we do budgets, if we start with the broad version and can narrow it as necessary if there's a second reading, that's probably the approach I prefer.
So I would offer a contrary approach, which is if you undercut the notion of going through the special exception, no one's going to go through the special exception. And so if you take 5-acre parcels, 3-acre parcels that, for example, at Washington Broad, we've gotten Creative Cauldron for this city, we've gotten 10% affordable, we've got all sorts of things that we just recently received capital contributions for schools and the like, and you give a streamlined process that doesn't have the same requirements, I can assure you, developers who are highly rational will go ahead and take the easier, simpler project that has less requirements. And so I think we're undercutting our own successful special exception process if we in fact open up a broad swath of T-zones of major parcels on major thoroughfares like North Washington to a more streamlined process. And so I personally would oppose such a proposal.
Paul, before we move off North Washington, I think last week we said that the total number of T-zones was 3% of the city. If we do exclude North Washington parcels, and obviously those are the 5, I think it's 5-acre and 4 acres total, do you know what that reduces the available T-zones down to? Did you happen to do that math?
Be off the top of my head, but you've got about 11 or 12 acres along North Washington. And the rest of the T-zones combined looks like 1 plus another 2, 3, 4.5, 5, 6, probably 7 or 8 acres in the rest of the T-zones. And some of those are already developed. Some of those 7 or 8 acres are already developed as townhouses, and so are unlikely to redevelop.
Got it, so 11 total on North Washington, and then you said 7 or 8 left?
Yeah, the number on North Washington, yeah, that sounds right.
11 plus 7 or 8, so 19. So 11 out of 19 would be excluded.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other comments, questions? Ms. Conley?
This is really to address the concern of, some people have spoken about wanting us to delay a first reading so that there can be more time for community involvement. And my understanding of having done this a number of times with the first reading is that's when we open it up to community involvement. City Council has been discussing this for more than a year with a variety of work sessions, and it probably doesn't seem transparent because it comes up and we discuss it and things change. So when we vote for a first reading, it, as you said, sir, it is the beginning of a legislative process, but it's the beginning of opening up the legislative process where then things are able to be discussed and the Planning Commission can discuss it, and we're able to put signs out that, as you requested, but that all happens with the first reading vote. And as Ms. Hardy said, with the first reading, things often change by the second reading because of that community input. But if we keep discussing it with more work sessions and different changes that staff are making related to council requests, it doesn't really provide that opportunity for community openness. So that's one reason why it would make sense to actually vote for this on first reading so that we are able to fully and fruitfully discuss it and see what happens next. And the calendar that Mr. Stoddard showed has the final vote, if we move forward, would not be until October. So that would give the community lots of time to provide input, to share with many others who would be affected by this, and get that kind of input.
Other comments? Ms. Leon?
I absolutely echo the importance of community engagement and supportive of going, putting this through first reading so we can actually get to that point. I ask that, Paul, we make sure that we provide opportunities for the community to provide feedback. I know that, I want to mention, particularly for the folks that have spoken, that we've actually slid the timing of this to respect the fact that we might not get a lot of input in the summer. So we're planning to accommodate that before we get this back into council in middle of fall in October. Paul, I have a question around section 110, line 110. When I took a look at the special exception side of this colorful table, the current process, I'm counting 5 work sessions, but I see 6. Is that just a typo? 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Okay, so current special exception process takes 11 months with 5 council work sessions. For the special use permit side, help me understand, and maybe it's my disconnect, please educate me, but didn't we at one point target this for a 6-month process? I think from an efficiency and making sure we're using time wisely and responding to feedback, not just residents, but, businesses that are tracking this zoning proposal very closely. Was I wrong? Did I see this at 6 months at one point?
I think there was an earlier iteration. I don't think we had worked it out in a schedule or a chart, but I had been thinking that 6 months could be feasible. In response to the council request last time, I did try to pull together this chart, and when I started thinking about the typical pace of the conversation in terms of submissions, turning those around into work sessions, comment responses, intermediate submissions, where I landed was a tentative schedule with 8 months. That's not to say it's the final answer. It was just sort of my initial read on it when I charted it out. I think if we were looking at ways to reduce this schedule, I think if some things could be done simultaneously, some of the reviews by other boards and commissions as well as council, or acknowledging that some things aren't going to require an intermediate submission, I think those would be the fastest ways to speed the process up.
Yeah, I would appreciate if part of the feedback process is taking a look at the timelines here and making sure we're casting a wide net on feedback, not just from residents, but from, all constituents in the city, businesses and such. I think that's it. Questions that I have for now.
Other comments, Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. So could we talk for a minute about parking? I'm mindful of Mr. Scherzi's statement that parking costs are an element in driving up the costs of any development here in the city. Mr. Stoddard, what are we putting out to the community in terms of a solution to that, or messaging about it, or a vision for it? Right now, most of the residential projects that we've done have had parking ratios that are improved from our old suburban model, but certainly nowhere near the Arlington model of very minimal required parking. what's your notion of what we're going to tell people that we're going to put out to the market that will deal with that problem of the high cost of parking, particularly in a smaller building where you just got to go further and further down if you're going to provide, the kind of parking ratios that we've provided at some of these other buildings that we've approved?
Sure. So it's so the question is about parking and what does staff communicate out. So staff's response to potential applicants or the building industry is usually a two-part answer. So the first part is always what's on the books, and that's the by right parking requirement. So if someone comes in and wants to do a by right project, then obviously they have to provide the ratios that are in the books. And as you mentioned, that is a more, it's classified as a suburban model, but I would say even the suburban model, well, it's classified as a suburban model. And then the second answer is also by the books, that under the code, with a properly crafted transportation demand management plan and parking management plan that gets reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission, then applicants can request and have successfully requested a reduction in those parking requirements. And I would put forward that reducing the parking requirements is a benefit to the community, that if you build a lot of parking, then you'll end up attracting a lot of cars as a consequence of that. And so what has been done with recent projects to include robust TDM plans, and this includes things like prepaid smart trip cards for Metro, operating subsidies for Capital Bike Share, information flyers to new residents, information about bus routes in the city. So all these things that you can do to tell people about what other transportation options they have, I think is beneficial in terms of cutting down on the number of cars that are moving into the city and ultimately the number of cars driving around on the city streets. And I guess I would just throw out sort of, if people question sort of, well, why are we sort of giving away or asking developers to give away all these transportation sort of goodies? Well, right now, we're expecting them to give everyone free parking. But as was noted, a free parking space costs someone $50,000. So if we can move people away from the $50,000 parking spaces and towards more cost-effective and less polluting modes of travel, then I think that's a plus.
Okay. Another question, looking at your, excuse me, graphic on page 5, T-zone build-out examples, half acre. So what I'd like the Planning Commission to wrestle with and staff to gather information on is, show me some examples of buildings that have gone in that have a minimum 10-foot rear clearance backed up to another multifamily building. I just, I'm just anecdotally thinking of over by East Falls Church, the high-end condominium development that backs up to the Econo Lodge. I mean, are there nearby examples of buildings that are architecturally, and aesthetically pleasing and apparently, able to be sold in the current market for handsome prices that we might adapt to specific conditions in Falls Church? Do you have any just thoughts? I'm not asking you to do the work that I hope that we'll vote for you to do. Do you have any thoughts about that? I mean, your own experience in Arlington or with them building buildings really close to existing buildings?
Sure. So I think the question is sort of how is that space handled in terms of when you've got two buildings that are getting close to one another?
Yes.
Okay. So there can be a problem, and there can be a problem that pops up when one building goes in first, and they get sort of everyone gets used to that building sort of being where it is, whether it's the views from the top of the floor or the views out some of the rear side windows. And then there's a proposal to do another building nearby. That can create, as you said, some conflict as people got used to the status quo, but it's, definitely a question to explore as we go out to the Planning Commission and find some examples of where that's been handled better and maybe some examples of what to avoid.
Okay, all right. I think, okay, and finally, the last time we discussed this, the mayor had an interesting comment that I took to heart, which is just because we want to design something here that will attract middle market housing doesn't mean it actually will. It could just attract more non-middle market housing, condominiums that'll sell for $1 million plus, which is not a bad thing in and of itself. We're doing it up to West Falls, and that's fine. There's a place for that in the housing market too. But I mean, my own personal interest in this issue is to try to do something to provide housing incentives for housing constructed in the, I don't know, pick a number, $600,000 to $800,000 bracket, something that somebody making, a household income of $200,000 could reasonably afford. That passes for, middle market housing here in Falls Church. Is there anything we can learn from other jurisdictions about what they have done and what kind of housing they have gotten as a result of what they have done, or what they, in the Arlington example, what they think that they are going to accomplish with their zoning changes over there?
Yeah, so obviously, right in your zoning ordinance, I don't think you can sort of be explicit about what the price point should be. I mean, obviously, you can, as we've done here, you can craft it to provide some measure of affordable housing and workforce housing, and we can look at exactly what that percentage can be in terms of the mandates. The other thing is in terms of the rules of the game, in terms of who's likely to build under what scenarios. There was a request, I think it was from Councilmember Leon, to engage with a wider set of stakeholders, including likely builders and developers. And of course, we'll do that post first reading. And part of that would be to assess, do you need 80% lot coverage? Or if you had this set of rules, what would you build? And can you show us examples of where you've done that in the past? So that when staff comes back, one, as part of engaging with the Planning Commission and the general public, and two, as part of coming back to council, staff would have a fuller answer of, what are different projects that people could build as you move the various levers and dials of this.
Okay, thank you. That's to me, that is such a high-value activity that, I take to heart Mr. Snyder's comments every time we consider a multifamily building that's rental. Why don't we tell them we just want condos? There's reasons for why I have not done that, and I think there's reasons that the market doesn't want to build condominiums on larger parcels, but I guess I'm hopeful that smaller parcels in a process, the way you describe it, might be more successful in getting that middle market housing. All right, thank you for your indulgence. Appreciate it.
All right. Ms. Hiscott and then Mr. Snyder.
Thank you. I wanted to going back to what Joseph Scherzy was talking about with regard to thinking about density and disincenting car traffic by increasing density, increasing walkability, bikeability, where we really want to be. I wanted to make sure I understood what the parking requirements for this would be. I know, like single-family homes, you really are only required one, but we've had different ratios, whether it's a one-bedroom, two-bedroom. We went back and forth on the one city center about parking ratios, on Founders Row 2 about what the right parking ratios are. What would the requirements for this be, and what opportunities do we have to disincent parking, essentially?
Sure. So I think the biggest disincentive to parking is actually the cost of constructing it. That from a builder's perspective, any square foot you spend building parking is square footage you didn't use to produce something you can sell, right? And when you account for sort of the space and the drive aisle, it ends up being 300 square feet of space. And so the space is expensive, and if they have to build, too many of them, then they have to dig underground, or they have to build 2 levels underground. And very quickly on a small site, depending on what the dimensions of it are, the requirement to dig or dig deeply means that the project's just financially infeasible. I don't really want to do this in real time and confuse the situation, but there are parking requirements that are based on the parking requirements that exist today. There's a parking table that based on the unit type, whether it's efficiency, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, requires a certain number of parking spaces to be provided. I don't have that readily available. I am sort of scrolling through Muni code as I go here. So that's what's that's what's required under the code. But as you mentioned, several projects, the technical process they do is to request a waiver, which is it's just the language in the code. It's a legal mechanism where they can request a reduction from what they have to park under code in exchange for providing transportation alternatives. As I mentioned earlier, that can include things like smart trip cards, contributions to the capital bike share, other means of other auto alternatives for transportation.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers the question. I'm worried it doesn't.
Well, at the end of the day, it's still coming back to council for work sessions, planning commission, architectural advisory board are reviewing all of these permits as well. So it's not as if we're walking away from our involvement in the process and ensuring it's
No,
the
of course,
best
council-
use for that land and for the city and for everybody involved.
Right, as a special use permit, council would still be reviewing the overall building program, and then the components that go into it, including the parking. And then, of course, the planning commission would have the final vote on the site plan, which is where the TDM would get finalized.
Okay, thank you very much.
Paul, I think on that note, from an efficiency perspective, if we're going to put forth 80% building coverage, I just want to make sure that the reference to existing parking requirements don't contradict the 80%. I want it, I would hope that we do this clean so that it supports the efficiency on the government side for looking at permits for potential developments here, where if we know outright that we're going to trigger applicants who want to build in these T1s to apply for an exception to current parking zones, it doesn't sound like it's structured for efficiency. So I just want us to pause and think about that. From an sustainability perspective, I totally agree with Councilwoman Hiskett that we want to encourage a walkable city, and if we're mandating 2 parking spots for efficiencies or 1-bedrooms, I don't know if we're balancing our multiple objectives for what we're trying to promote in the city from a sustainability and kind of ESC perspective. So just making sure we think through that based on what I'm
It has hearing. been on the council work plan in the past, and we actually had a technical assistance award from COG to support a revision to the multifamily parking requirements. Unfortunately, the year we won the award is the same year the pandemic hit, and since the technical study had an expiration to it, we weren't able to complete it before we lost the grant. But it's certainly something we could go after again and put on the work plan for another visit.
I'd support revisiting that for sure in the work plan. Thanks for mentioning that.
All right, either one of you.
Sure. Thank you for a very good discussion, and thanks for all the work that's been done on this. And I certainly agree that this is an area worthy of discussion and more work. So there are a couple of fundamental issues here. The first is the overall justification for this, as I understand it, sits on 3 pillars. First, the so-called missing middle. Secondly, or related to it, is affordable housing. And third, commercial development. I agree with addressing all of those issues, but there are much better ways to address each and every one of them. As I've said repeatedly, we approve these mixed-use developments with hundreds of units, and yet we never require that they meet the missing middle. So that the missing middle issue could be addressed far more effectively with these big developments than the downsides that are presented by this particular proposal. Likewise, commercial development. Second major area of concern has been raised by our citizens, which is the build-out, 80% build-out. And when you look at that graphic, can you go back to the graphic of the proposed build-out? Yeah, I would ask how many people really want to live next to that proposed development with a reduced, I appreciate that, thank you. Who with that right in their backyard. The next, so the build-out concerns me not only from an appearance standpoint, but from an environmental standpoint. I think if it were single-family home, for example, you'd have far more green space to absorb water, and we've seen an example of the need to do that, than you would with this proposal. So while it may achieve one objective, it harms another objective, which is the environmental objectives. So the build-out remains a serious issue for me, even if you're going to move in this direction. The next issue relates to the by right, where I think all of this should be subject to a special exception type approach, and only part of the potential build-outs are. So you could be faced with that proposed build-out without really having any ability to have much say about it. So those are my principal concerns, and they've been raised by citizens. If I recall, too, Cindy, maybe you can pull it up, or the city clerk, the Village Preservation and Improvement Society wrote us a couple weeks ago and gave us some extensive comments as well. And much has been made about, oh, yeah, we'll do first reading, we'll talk about it some more. But my own view is that generally speaking, there are so many fundamental flaws with this proposal as it is, that I reluctantly will have to vote against it going forward, because I think it's so fundamentally flawed at this point that there are better ways to achieve its fundamental objective, and it creates many intended or unintended negative consequences on our neighborhood. So for all those reasons, I'll be voting against first reading tonight, because I think a lot more work needs to be done to respond to the very real issues that our citizens have presented to us. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Hardy.
Thank you. I did have some questions. So going back to, I think one of the changes that's been made since our fifth work session last week is I like the add of, I think what the city attorney called kind of an optional provision around 10% affordable housing. So if legally allowed, that seems like a good add to be more specific. I guess a follow-on to that, because I raised this last week as well, is can we also be more specific with stormwater? So because of the concern about increasing lot coverage, can we be more prescriptive on requiring more stringent stormwater? Because I'd love to do it on single family, and I know there's kind of a TBD on that, but if we can do it in T-zones, that could, help.
I think we'll have to take a look at it. I think it's probably a bit more difficult simply because of the varying needs of every piece of property is going to be different. It's harder to set a standard that you could meet like that. But we can certainly consider, if we're making an optional plan or an option that a property owner wants to take advantage of, whether that's a factor we could write into it somehow.
Yeah, I would support adding both affordable housing and the stormwater requirement in there to address the concerns that we see in our residential neighborhoods. Second question, so I know that we're calling out specific housing types that would be allowed for multifamily, so condos and townhomes, and single-family homes would no longer be a by right option. Given some of the earlier comments we heard at the beginning of the night around duplexes and quads, would those be allowed housing types under that multifamily use? Where do we classify that? So if someone bought a T-zone parcel, could they redevelop it and put a quadplex up?
There is a definition. I would have to look at those definitions, but if the direction is to specifically allow duplexes and quadplexes, we could look at that.
I just want to make sure we're being inclusive. Again, the spirit of kind of T-zones and allowing and encouraging that middle housing is, let's be expansive in our definitions of those types of housing. So I would support that, I guess.
Yeah, if that's the direction, I might suggest sort of including that in the proposed language.
Where would you suggest we add that for the?
So in the conditional uses on conditional uses line 210. I think you could include it there. Townhouses, apartments, condominiums. Now the question is, do you want duplexes and quadplexes to also be governed by special use permit, or do you want those to be by right?
I don't know, but would staff's recommendation be on that? Like, do we think of them more like single-family homes, or do we think of more of them like multifamily? And we don't have to answer that tonight, but I just want to make sure that, again, that first reading, if we're trying to be broad and make sure that we're thinking about all the possible options, that we don't preclude those.
Sure. I think it would be unusual to have a special use permit for something like a duplex. It's, they're generally modest in size, and that the impacts aren't much different from a single family house. And if the direction is inclusivity as part of the referral out, then I would think it would be a by right use.
I'm okay with that.
Make a by right use, you might lose access to the guaranteed affordability requirements.
Say that last point again, Paul.
So the 10% affordable, and Carol, you can step in here, but I think the 10% affordability is linked to it being a conditional use. I don't know that you can mandate affordability in a by right use.
Well, I think I agree that you could not mandate it in a by right use. Because we've created sort of an option that someone can take advantage of if they choose, that is the idea, and that's something we're going to continue to look at. But I think also, I guess the question is if you put, and I think we'll have to consider what the permutations of this are, but if you put something in there like duplexes or quadplexes, then, and you make that by right, we've just taken single family out by right, but then you have that as a competition of a way in which to use your property for residential uses. The idea of making it an optional use was the only by right uses were these commercial retail type uses. And so if you wanted to use your property for residential uses, you would need to take advantage of this option, which required some affordable housing. So I think that's something we'll have to think about a little bit, is whether allowing or duplexes by right ends up eroding your ability to, or people's property owners need to use the affordable housing mechanism to get to residential uses on their property.
Got it. So could we write it in at this point to kind of come back with a recommendation by second reading, or does it need to be specified?
Well, I do sense that there's a lot of work to be done between now and second reading, and we may have to, we will try to, as we work through it, and as we work it through the Planning Commission and their public input process, I think we can certainly work on that and see what we can get to in terms of recommendation, and work with Planning Commission to develop that recommendation and bring it back to council.
Great. And in that spirit of kind of, I like Mary Beth's comment around clarifying what really first reading is. It's really a referral out. And so in that spirit, besides referring to the Planning Commission, and maybe this is what's planned as part of line 125, Planning Commission Board and Commission session that's planned for early July. Obviously, there's housing impacts. We already heard from the chair of the ESC talking about how density actually only helps us on the climate change front. Can we make sure that those two boards, and perhaps others, if they'd like to chime in, are part of that review, if not a formal referral to those boards? Paul, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we can certainly find a way to include them. I've certainly heard from some liaisons that they're hearing from their boards and commissions that they'd probably like to comment on some of the aspects of the proposal. I'm sure we can find a way to one, inform the various boards and commissions that might have a stake in this of what's going on, and then sort of work with the liaisons to make sure they have adequate time to review and comment, and hopefully they would come to that July 6th Planning Commission session to air those things and talk amongst themselves. Having written comments is always great, but actually having people in the same room sort of talking through things is better.
So the intent of that July 6th session is kind of a pan-board and commission meeting that the Planning Commission would host. Is that right?
Correct.
So even if we don't refer officially to the Housing Commission and an ESC, for example, they would be invited to that one or required to go to that one?
Yeah, I can't require anybody to show up to anything, but certainly I would invite boards and commissions to send 1 or 2 reps to that. The reason for 1 or 2 is open meeting laws and also the management of the meeting. But I would hope that sort of 1 or 2 members from each of those groups could show up to that night and engage with the Planning Commission about sort of what would work on these lots or what could work.
Got it. So my final kind of comment/request is, again, the spirit of T-zones is really thinking about how to transition from kind of dense and tall that we see in our kind of broad and Washington areas to kind of single-family neighborhoods. And so I appreciated seeing the visual that was added in the report that kind of shows lot coverage, setbacks. Along those lines, I would love to actually have 2 more boxes that show kind of what's allowed in single-family homes if built out to the maximum level, and then what's allowed in our special exception kind of core commercial areas. Because hopefully what we find from this is that keeping status quo obviously hasn't elicited any of these missing middle housing types or kind of the infill development that we're looking for. So status quo for me doesn't seem like it works. But I think seeing the visual of the single family homes and then much bigger one will show us that hopefully the proposed idea or some iteration of it is really that Goldilocks. It could be that perfect middle solution. And I think having that visual would help us understand, gosh, in single family homes right now, you couldn't even build to, 40 feet, right? Is it 40 feet, Paul?
35 feet to the midline. So for the houses that are being constructed, they actually, the peak of the roof ends up substantially higher than 35 feet.
Got it. And then along the lines of, I think what Debbie's comments were parking, I support both, I think, what Caroline and Debbie talked about was revisiting our parking code. I think along the lines of kind of T-zones being the Goldilocks of kind of the zoning, I would love for us to think more progressively about what's required. It seems grossly unfair that I think our single-family homes require 1 space on site, and presumably they're probably households of 4 or 5 drivers. And so the fact that they can allow their cars to overflow in single-family neighborhoods because on those public streets, whereas we don't allow that elsewhere, seems to kind of give away that free public resource to single-family homeowners and not allow that for something like that's kind of the small transition infill development. So in general, I would support kind of revisiting that. But again, I hope that if we think about T-zones really as that Goldilocks, we can come to reasonable requirements for setbacks, coverage, as well as parking. Thank you. That's it.
Other comments? Ms. Conley? We should try to wrap this conversation up too.
Ms. McCosker, this one's for you. So as we think about how first readings flow into community involvement, into second readings, is this written such that the concerns that Ms. Chavez had and others had could be incorporated into a second reading without requiring a new first reading? Because I know we've had that happen too, where we have a first reading of so many changes, so we need a new first reading before a second reading. Is this broad enough that changes can be incorporated in such a way that we're tightening it up as we go?
It's hard to answer that with every detail being considered right now. I think that many of the issues, for instance, one of the concerns is the 80% coverage. That could certainly be reduced within the scope of the first reading. It's hard for me to say sitting here today because there's a lot of issues being discussed and there may be a number of changes that have to be made. We may need a new first reading based on something that grows out of a lot of input, and we could bring that back to council for first reading. And if quicker second reading because we've had so much input. And I wouldn't want to rule that out just because we do have a lot of issues that have been discussed. But there are a number of things that could be done on second reading that would be within the scope that have been raised today.
Okay, any final words from anyone? You have some, so I would just say my thoughts. One, it's a laudable exercise to try to address missing middle, a type of housing that is not currently in the city. I think that right now we haven't really honed this product or what we're proposing enough to actually ensure that we get what we want to see and not undercut the good things that we do already, such as the special exception process, which has brought us lots of benefits, a reduced tax rate, affordable housing, all sorts of other things that may be in jeopardy in some of the changes we're proposing. And so I don't think it's appropriate for us to sort of cast this out until we have a better idea of what exactly we want. It almost seems like we want to have a discussion about this, and to my mind, I think that's entirely relevant. I just don't think the notion of having a ordinance out there for consideration that we may vote on in the near future that really hasn't, to my mind, been fully considered and fully thought out is what we should be doing right now. And so I would suggest more work needs to be done on what we've heard tonight to more closely match what we want to receive with the words on paper and what actually the ordinance says. So I think at this point, to my mind, it's not just ready to be sent out to boards and commissions and to be voted on. And I imagine my colleagues don't fully share that thought, but so be it. Do we have a motion then that someone would like to make now?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I would move to grant first reading to TO 22-09. Refer to the Planning Commission, schedule second reading and public hearing for October 22nd, 2022, and advertise the same according to law with an alteration at line 24A would read limited to lots less than 1 acre in size. So deleting the words not fronting on North Washington Street and.
So just so we all understand, or at least I understand, that change would mean lots, for example, 1 acre on North Washington would be eligible.
And the map would, to the degree that staff information needs to reflect that change, yeah, the map would show that those would be eligible for discussion.
And so just to make sure we all understand the rules, a lot that currently is 5 acres could be broken down into 5 1-acre lots. There's no restriction on that.
Understood based on your previous conversation with the Vice Mayor.
Okay. All right, so I have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
If
All right.
I could just interject for a moment, so that edit suggested is in the text of the staff report, but I would suggest making it in the text of the code on line 323. And I think it's just a matter of striking, it begins, the last word of 322 and then into 323. I think the motion is to strike and do not have frontage on North Washington Street.
Right, basically to strike everything after the word acre on line 322, including all of line 323 and 320, well, it's 323 and 324.
Well, I think you'd want to keep and council.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, and council finds that yeah, I'm sorry. Ended at North Washington. Same thing that I said for the staff report, basically, just apply that to the code language.
So you're just changing the line number? I got that, thank you.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk?
Could I make a quick amendment, friendly amendment? I don't know if this requires it, but per the conversation about referring out to the Housing Commission and the ESC, given that they're not required to show up at this PAN Board and Commission meeting, does that require an amendment that if I wanted them explicitly referred to, or got the referral?
I think if you want to explicitly require that it be referred to them, yes, that should be an amendment to the motion. And so if you want to make a motion to amend that, to include those two, then we should vote on that amendment and then go back to the motion, either as amended or not.
Mr. Duncan, how do you feel about that amendment?
I support its spirit, but I don't feel strongly about requiring it.
Yes.
I support it going to housing and ESC. I mean, they're the experts in housing and and the environmental impacts of what these projects would be, of a lot coverage of 80%. Like,
Okay.
What are those who
I yield.
know
Okay.
ESC best and housing best?
All right, that's fine.
They're the ones
So the
who are
language would
trying to
need to
address
say-
the missing middle and trying to address stormwater and.
No, substantively, I'm fine. I'm just procedurally trying to get us through. So refer to the Planning Commission, Architectural Advisory Board, and Housing Commission, I'm sorry.
No, Housing Commission and the Environmental Sustainability Council.
All right, Housing Commission and Environmental Sustainability Council.
And per Carol, we need to vote on that amendment first before the actual, right?
So,
Yes, that would be the proper way to do it. Is, Ms. Hardy, you make the motion to amend it to add those two. Someone needs to second it, and then you take a vote on that amendment.
Got it. I propose to amend the motion to also refer out to the Housing Commission and the ESC.
I second.
All right, Madam Clerk.
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0 and amends the previous motion.
And so you have a motion and a second on the amended motion. So now you're ready for a vote on the original motion as amended.
All right.
You ready?
Yep.
Okay. Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
No.
Mayor Tarter?
No.
Motion carries 5-2. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take a 10-minute break. It's 10:16. Let's take a break till 10:26. 6:26. Let's get back into our session here. Madam Clerk, will you call the next item?
I'm waiting for confirmation. Yes, we're good within your 30-second time delay.
That's good. Yeah, thank you. So we have TO 22-11, ordinance to amend ordinance 2026, 2027, 2032, 2034, 2038, and 2040 regarding the budget of expenditures and revenues appropriating funds for fiscal year 2022 for the general fund, school operating fund, and the capital improvements program funds.
All right, thank you. Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor Tarver, members of council. Ms. Bauer will give the staff report. I don't think we'll go through the whole thing because we did cover this in work session, but there are some changes, and Ms. Bauer will highlight some of the changes that we made since work session, which we're asking for council's support on first reading for this ordinance tonight. Ms. Bauer? Uh-oh, now I'm nervous.
Just got a text, she's here.
While she's waiting to unmute, Ms. Conley, do you have a disclosure you'd like to read? All right, I'll go ahead and start while you get your mouth full. I make the following disclosure before the City Council's consideration of TO 22-11 relating to the FY 2022 budget. My wife's employee of the Falls Church City School Board, and therefore I'm a member of a group of 3 or more persons who may be affected by these matters. I can participate in them fairly, objectively, in the public interest.
I make the following statement before City Council's discussion of TO 22-11 relating to the FY 2022 budget. I am an employee of the Falls Church City School Board and a member of a group of 3 or more persons who may be affected by these matters. I can participate in them fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
All right, Ms. Powell, are you available?
So one thing I will note, I know that Ms. Bauer was having a family event tonight, so she might have gotten pulled away for that. Okay. One thing I will just note is that in the normal fiscal calendar for a year, we typically do have a year-end budget amendment, and it happens to address grants and other revenues that come in over the course of the year, and this would be the final budget amendment for this fiscal year. Some of the changes that we are requesting relative to what you saw at work session were a couple of additions, including an addition of $18,000 for the funding for the public works vehicles, and so that's one of the changes. That's at line 34. And then at line 52, we've received 2 additional grants in the amount of $6,216. So we ask that those be added to this budget amendment. And in the probably the most notable one is in the chart that starts on page 66, line 66. We're asking for 3 changes noted in gray, which is additional costs for the Treasurer's Office. That's a $12,000 budget request. And then use of $120,000 of debt service savings that would go to capital reserves. And so we were anticipating that we're going to issue additional debt for this fiscal year, which we're not doing. We're using cash instead, so those savings would go to capital reserves. And then one of the debt issuances was going to be for the purchase of IT core infrastructure and reinvestment. And we're requesting that we use underspending in jail and salary savings and some other non-departmental savings as well, so we can use $250,000 in lieu of debt for that IT reinvestment.
And Mr. Shields, I'll note Ms. Ball was here. She was having trouble hearing us, but she is on now.
Okay. So Ms. Bauer, I've gotten us through all the operating budget changes, and now we're at line 91 for changes to the capital improvements program.
Okay. Good evening again. So on the capital side, The school board request for appropriation has increased by 200,000. They had received funding for construction of the trapezoid parking lot in the amount of 200,000 at the Meridian High School that they would like to appropriate. So that is being added to their funding request as part of the CIP. On the special transportation fund, the only thing I would like to mention there is that since the last work session, the amount of the VDOT funding grant has been increased by 25,300. The purpose and the timing and the scope remains all the same as discussed earlier. I think we've covered everything so far. Main changes were all on the general fund, and I think Mr. Shields covered that. Happy to address if there are any questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions or comments? Mr. Duncan?
Is this the point where I get to ask if the school fund balance of $2.9 million is a number that Ms. Balawi knew about or it's been included in previous reports, and if it represents the entire sum total of fund balance except for the, I think they carried over something like 450, so are my numbers right?
Sorry, so their estimated fund balance is expected to be at the end of this fiscal year is expected to be 592,000. And that is net off the 450 that's programmed for fiscal year 2023. But that does not include any projected underspending for the current fiscal year or any revenue excess that they may have.
Okay, so that's the going forward number. So is the 2.9 million use of school fund balance in chart on line 72 past money that they are now choosing to spend on the things listed?
That's correct.
So, okay, all right. Do we have any policy about how much fund balance the schools carry over from year to year?
Yes, there is a policy, and I'm going to have to search it. I'll find it in a minute. I think it's either 1% or some percent of expenditures, and I'll get to it in a minute.
Okay, well, it's late. We don't need to take time. I'm not on budget and finance anymore, but could we just include that as a data point, like where are we, in the same way that we would have that data for the city side, and should. We just make sure to include that going forward. I mean, it's good that we've got all that money. Hey, it's a good thing, and it's good they're spending it on things that are important. Just going forward, it would be helpful to know when we're in the budget wars, how many cents of the tax rate are embedded in underspending or carryover funds on both sides, city and schools.
Sure.
Mr. Duncan, underneath that chart, line 75, says the ending school fund balance is $591,000 upon the use of those funds. Oh, so it had been three.
It had been three, am I wrong?
Right.
I take from that it had been 3.4 million. They spent 2.9 million, and there's 591,000.
Correct.
That's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
That's right, okay.
And as we had discussed earlier, this is a little bit off normal because of the COVID, some of the under expenditures that they had.
Yes, that's why I asked that question earlier. Believe it or not, I was thinking of that. Okay, thanks.
Other questions, comments? Ms. Leon?
Are you sure it's only 1%?
No, there is some
'Cause that's
figures,
low.
I'm not sure when. And I know Ms. Conley had sent me that policy. I'm trying to look for that email.
Yeah, I can't remember what it said.
Okay. Because I just want to make sure we represent that correctly, right? Because, if it's the 1%, then the deduction is that the schools are carrying more than the target balance. So it would be good to know. I think this is great as we talk about level setting, around this, particularly with, 4 new school board members, I think it's just good to have out for discussion, Ms. Bauer, when we have our upcoming meeting on Wednesday, for example, just to recap that. I know it's helpful for me. I should remember it, but I actually don't. Yeah.
Other comments, questions? Okay, do we have a motion?
I move to grant first reading of TO 22-11, schedule second reading and public hearing for June 13th, 2022, and advertise the same according to law.
All right, do we have a second?
Second?
Ms. Leon on the second. Although there's no member of the public here, I'm going to open it up to public comment. Seeing none, the matter's closed to the public. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the next item, the consent items. Does anyone want to remove any item from the consent agenda? If not, is there a motion regarding the consent agenda?
Mayor, move the consent agenda.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Let's go with Ms. Leon on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you. Any business not on the agenda? Standing or regional committee or council liaison reports? Ms. Hardy?
I just want to make sure everyone had on their calendars the historical marker dedications tomorrow at 3:30.
All right, that will be a nice event, absolutely. Any other, Mr. Snyder?
Thanks a lot, Mr. Mayor. A couple quick things. First of all, thanks to everyone involved in the very great visit of the Vice President, and thanks to the Falls Church Education Foundation for a great gala. A couple things. We were contacted by citizens on the sound walls that should have been replaced in the I-66 inside the Beltway project, and I'm working with Cindy Mester to create a formal, strong request to VDOT to carry out that commitment to our citizens. Second issue is the RFP is out on the street now for the further planning for the bus rapid transit. With regard to the NVTC meeting, I think it's June 2nd, I'll be out of the country on job-related travel, and I wonder if someone could cover that meeting. Legislative Committee, Cindy, when's the next meeting of that? Do we want to do it on the call when we know more, or when do you want to?
Yeah, we don't have one scheduled. We're waiting to know more. Right now, what learned today was June 1st. The General Assembly's been called back, but I don't have any details yet. I would recommend we meet when we know something.
Okay.
This will be probably giving you 3 days' notice, so we do the public notice, and then we'll meet.
Okay. And then this Wednesday, I have a legislative committee for NVTC, which is why I won't be at the mayor's meeting or at the office hours. So just wanted to make all those notes. Thank you all very much.
We don't have a mayor's meeting on Wednesday, though, correct, Mayor?
No mayor's meeting? Okay.
Yeah.
Office hours at 9.
Budget and Finance is 8 to 9, and then office hours at 9.
Okay, well, the reason why I won't be at those is I'm on something else regionally.
I just want to make sure I knew that. What's up?
All right, any other comments, requests?
And because we've had such success in economic development, the Economic Development Committee is going to take this month off. Staff deserves a well-earned break, and we will not meet this Thursday. We will convene again June 23rd, by which time all sorts of more miraculous things will have happened.
Right.
Also, while we're at it, thanks to the Public Utilities Commission for launching itself. Ms. Hiscott is the council liaison, but I listened into the meeting. Very conscientious group of people, very good report from staff. I thought they got off to a good start. They have a lot on their plate. And finally, thanks to those who were involved in the groundbreaking ceremony Thursday for the West Falls project, which was, I'm sorry to say, I love our vice president, don't get me wrong, but if I had to pick the event of the week, that was the event of the decade even. Mr. Lickenhouse had a nice post on LinkedIn about the significance of that groundbreaking and the project itself. I commend to your attention what he wrote. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Leon?
Wyatt, for Aurora House, there was a request to try and understand where the carpet installation was. And where that is. It's been approved, but it hasn't been done. So I just want to let you know that that committee's looking to get a status on that, because there are other improvements that are predicated on that carpet being installed.
Okay, and I will follow up with you on that, and I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any final words? Any last words, Ms. Hardy?
Sorry, scheduling thing, because we're not having a mayor's meeting. Could we pencil in a closed session to review employee reviews on either June 6th or June 13th, and then plan on doing salary resolutions on the June 27th meeting?
Sure.
And so a heads up for Councilmember, I will be sending you draft reviews in the coming days. So working backwards, so we need to do it by the end of the fiscal year. So the June 27th meeting is when we'll vote on the salary resolutions, and then working backwards from that, closed session for council, either June 6th or June 13th, but maybe pencil in for both for now, if we need to talk about it multiple times. Thank you.
All right. Any last words? Anything else? All right, why don't we call it a night? Thanks, everyone. Let's adjourn.
Thank you, council.